Hook. The young Navy SEAL didn't hesitate. He grabbed Riley by the arm and shoved her straight off the dock. She hit the Columbia River at 5:47 in the morning, before sunrise, in water cold enough to steal the breath from a healthy man in seconds. Then he turned and walked away. He thought he had just removed a trespasser. He thought she was some middle-aged woman who didn't belong near a restricted training area. He was wrong. Terribly wrong. Riley Hart was 52 years old. She had survived combat zones most Americans would never hear about. She had spent 3 decades inside one of the most demanding military communities on Earth. She had commanded missions that were still classified. She had buried friends, endured wars, and fought battles that never appeared on television. The SEAL knew none of that. All he saw was a woman standing alone on a training dock. And in less than 3 seconds, he made the worst decision of his career. Because Riley wasn't a civilian. She wasn't a tourist. She wasn't lost. She was the 3-star Admiral sent to investigate his command. And what nobody at Fort Raven Naval Station knew that morning was that Riley had arrived carrying something far more dangerous than rank. She carried questions. Questions about missing injury reports. Questions about trainees whose careers had mysteriously ended after filing complaints. Questions about medical records that didn't match witness statements. Questions powerful people desperately hoped nobody would ever ask. Within 72 hours, federal investigators would arrive. Senior officers would be suspended. Whistleblowers would come out of hiding. Secret recordings would surface. And a corruption network stretching across multiple military installations would begin to collapse. But none of that had happened yet. At 5:47 a.m., it was just a woman in freezing water. A young SEAL walking away. And a mistake that was about to expose years of lies. If you're already wondering what Riley discovered after climbing out of that river, stay with me until the very end. And before we begin, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to that cold morning at Fort Raven Naval Station, where one shove changed everything. Cold mist rolled over the Columbia River before sunrise, wrapping Fort Raven Naval Station in gray silence. The training dock stood black against the water, wet with dew, wind, and something that felt almost like warning. Vice Admiral Riley Hart arrived alone. She preferred it that way. At 52 years old, Riley had learned that the fewer people who walked beside her, the fewer people tried to explain where she belonged. She was a tall woman, nearly 5'9", with a lean frame shaped by decades of discipline rather than vanity. Her silver-brown hair was tied into a tight knot beneath a dark running cap, and the pale scar near her left eyebrow gave her calm face a sharper edge. Her eyes were gray, not soft gray like rain clouds, but the hard gray of river stones polished by years of pressure. She wore black running gear, waterproof shoes, and a Navy windbreaker with no visible rank. To anyone careless, she looked like a civilian who had wandered too far. To anyone observant, she moved like someone who had spent her life measuring rooms, exits, threats, and silence. Riley had survived 3 combat deployments, 2 classified operations that did not officially exist, and 30 years of being told, sometimes politely, sometimes cruelly, that women like her were not built for the world she had chosen. She had stopped arguing long ago. Arguments wasted oxygen. Work did not. Fort Raven Naval Station sat near Astoria, Oregon, where the Columbia River widened toward the Pacific and the air always seemed to carry salt, pine, and rust. The base was known for its Special Operations Training Program, a place where young men arrived full of muscle and certainty and left either hardened, humbled, or broken. Lately, too many had left broken. That was why Riley was here. Officially, she had come for an operational readiness inspection. Unofficially, she had come because 3 injury reports did not match medical notes. Because 1 junior officer had been transferred after filing a complaint. Because 1 trainee's wrist had been shattered during a drill and somehow recorded as a harness malfunction. Because paperwork, when it lied, always left a shadow. And Riley had spent her life following shadows. The 2 guards at the landward gate saw her access card at 5:31 a.m. The younger one, a freckled sailor with nervous hands and red ears, scanned it once, then again, then looked at the screen as if the machine had accused him of treason. The older guard, a broad black man with tired eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, glanced at Riley, recognized the level of clearance, and quietly stepped aside. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. Riley nodded once. "Cold morning," she replied. "Yes, ma'am. River's mean today." Riley looked past him toward the dock. "It usually is." She walked through before either guard could offer an escort. That was her first mistake, though she would never call it that. Riley did not believe in blaming victims for the decisions of fools. The restricted training dock stretched into the dark water like a blade. 40 feet of damp wood and steel, lined with safety rings, warning signs, and old floodlights that had not yet gone off. The sky above was still charcoal. The eastern horizon had only begun to pale. Somewhere beyond the river bend, a buoy bell clanged in the fog. Riley stopped at the end of the dock and stood with her hands at her sides. This was not her first cold morning by dangerous water. When she was 21, her father had stood with her on a dock in Maine and told her the Navy would admire her ambition but never fully accept her presence. Admiral Thomas Hart had been a tall, severe man with frost-white hair, a square jaw, and the kind of voice that made rooms quiet before he entered them. He loved his daughter deeply in the imperfect way of men trained to command more easily than comfort. He had not meant to wound her when he said, "Riley, you could still build a respectable career in medical logistics. Something stable. Something realistic." He thought he was protecting her. That had hurt more than if he had meant to insult her. Riley had spent the next 30 years proving him wrong, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the steady violence of excellence. She rose through ranks that did not open easily. She learned when to speak, when to wait, when to document, and when to let arrogant men bury themselves with their own words. Now her father was 81, retired, widowed, and softer in ways he would deny if asked. He sent her messages sometimes. Short ones. Weather reports. Newspaper links. Once, after her promotion to Vice Admiral, he had written only, "Your mother would have cried." Riley had read that message 5 times. She had not answered. The wind shifted, slicing through her jacket. She looked down at the Columbia River. The water below was black and restless. 48 degrees, maybe colder. Cold enough to seize lungs. Cold enough to punish panic. Behind her, boots struck the dock. Fast. Heavy. Angry before they had reason to be. Riley did not turn immediately. "Hey," a male voice barked. Young. Confident. Too confident. Riley kept her eyes on the water. "This dock is restricted," the man said. "You need to move." "I'm aware," Riley answered. The boots stopped several feet behind her. "Ma'am," he said, and the word carried no respect, only irritation wearing a uniform. "I said you need to move." Riley turned slowly. Petty Officer Logan Pierce stood facing her in gray training gear, his arms tense at his sides, his chest rising hard from a morning run. He was 28, maybe 29, 6'2", with sandy blonde hair cut almost to the scalp and a square face made harsher by sleeplessness and pride. A narrow scar crossed his chin, poorly healed, the kind men liked to pretend came with a better story than it did. His blue eyes were sharp but shallow in that moment, seeing shape before substance, category before person. He was built like a recruiting poster and behaved like a warning label. Riley read him in 3 seconds. Young enough to confuse volume with authority. Trained enough to be dangerous. Tired enough to be careless. Proud enough to make stupidity feel righteous. "Your name," Riley said. He blinked, offended by the direction of the question. "Petty Officer Logan Pierce." "Assigned unit?" "Falcon Company. Special Warfare Training Cadre." He lifted his chin. "And you're standing on an active training dock without authorization." Riley reached into her jacket and held up her access card. Logan barely glanced at it. "That doesn't mean you can stand wherever you want." Riley studied him. "Actually, Petty Officer, it means more than you understand." His mouth tightened. There it was. The shift. The moment a man decided that misunderstanding her was easier than listening to her. "Lady, I don't care what office gave you a badge," he said. "This dock is closed during morning operations." Riley felt something old move inside her. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too generous. This was colder. Recognition. She had met Logan Pierce 100 times in different bodies. The man at the briefing table who repeated her idea 5 minutes later and received applause. The colonel who called her aggressive for asking the same question he called decisive from a male officer. The instructor who once told her she had excellent stamina for a woman, as if endurance came with a gender label stitched into the lungs. Riley had outlived them all. "Step aside," she said. Logan gave a short laugh. It was not loud. That was what made it ugly. It was casual. Not happening. Riley looked past him toward the gate. The guards were too far away to hear clearly through the wind and fog. A floodlight flickered above the dock entrance. Somewhere inland, a whistle blew as the base began waking. She could identify herself. She could end this immediately. But Riley had come to Fort Raven to inspect a culture, not receive a ceremony. People behaved differently when rank stood in front of them with medals. They behaved truthfully when they thought power was absent. And Logan Pierce was telling her something true. Not about her. About this place. "I'm going to walk back to the administrative building," Riley said evenly. "You are going to remove your body from my path." Logan stepped closer instead. He smelled of cold sweat, cheap aftershave, and the stale coffee of men who considered sleep optional and self-awareness decorative. "Come on," he said. "Don't make this difficult." Riley's eyes narrowed. "Remove your hand before you decide to use it." For half a second, something flickered across his face. Doubt, perhaps. Instinct warning him that this woman was not what she appeared to be. Then pride killed it. His hand closed around her upper arm. Hard. Not a guiding touch. Not a professional restraint. A claim. Riley looked down at his hand, then back at his face. "Let go," she said. He did not. Instead, Logan twisted her toward the edge of the dock. "Off the training area," he snapped. Riley could have broken his wrist. That fact was simple, clean, available. Her left foot was already placed to pivot. His thumb was exposed. His balance leaned forward. A younger version of Riley might have taught him a lesson through pain before he finished the next breath. But vice admirals did not get the luxury of reacting like wounded 21-year-olds. She chose restraint. Logan chose for both of them. He shoved her. The world tilted. For one strange second, Riley saw the dock above her, the iron sky beyond it, and Logan's face shrinking into a pale shape framed by fog. Then she hit the Columbia River shoulder first. The cold was absolute. It did not feel like water at first. It felt like impact, like being struck by a god made of knives. Her lungs seized. Her skin burned. Her ears filled with dark, roaring silence. The river swallowed her whole, dragging her down just long enough for memory to open its old doors. A night off the coast of Norway. A training accident near Kodiak. A classified extraction where the water had been colder and men had been screaming and Riley had been 31, bleeding from the scalp, still issuing orders because someone had to. Panic rose like an animal. She killed it before it found teeth. Riley kicked once, hard, surfaced, and forced air into her lungs. The breath came jagged, humiliating, human. She grabbed a piling slick with algae and held on. Her fingers burned almost instantly. Above her, Logan stood at the edge of the dock. For a moment, he looked down. Their eyes met. Riley expected shock. She expected apology. She expected at least the dawning fear of a man realizing he had gone too far. Instead, Logan gave a dismissive shake of his head and turned away. He walked back toward shore. Something inside Riley went very still. Not broken. Not furious. Still. That was worse. She hung in the freezing river for 3 seconds, breathing carefully, counting her body's condition with clinical precision. Shoulder functional. Hands numb but responsive. No head strike. No immediate fracture. Shoes heavy. Jacket waterlogged. Ladder 12 feet east. She began moving. Every stroke was a command. Every breath was a negotiation. The river pulled at her like it had a claim to make, but Riley Hart had never respected claims made by force. By the time she reached the ladder, shouting had begun. Not training shouts. Not cadence. Not the theatrical violence of instructors performing toughness. This was panic. Where is she? A woman's voice. Sharp. Terrified. Professional enough to stay useful. Pierce. Where is the Admiral? Logan stopped halfway down the dock. Lieutenant Commander Hannah Vale came running through the fog with a tablet clutched in one hand and her dark coat flying open behind her. Hannah was 36, compact and athletic, with warm brown skin, black hair pulled into a severe bun, and eyes that missed very little. She had the precise, controlled manner of an officer who survived chaotic rooms by making lists faster than other people made excuses. Under normal circumstances, she was calm to the point of seeming cold. In this moment, fear had stripped the polish off her face. "Where is Vice Admiral Hart?" Hannah demanded. Logan frowned. There was a woman on the dock. Where is she? He pointed toward the river. Hannah turned. Riley was climbing the last 3 rungs of the ladder. Water poured from her jacket, her sleeves, her hair, her shoes. Her cap was gone. Her silver-brown hair clung to her face and neck. One side of her jaw had reddened from the impact. Her hands were pale from cold, but steady. She stepped onto the dock. No one spoke. The river ran off her in steady streams, tapping against the wood like impatient fingers. Hannah moved toward her, horror and discipline fighting across her face. "Ma'am." Riley raised one hand. Hannah stopped. Riley turned her gaze to Logan Pierce. He had gone pale beneath his tan. Not slightly pale. Empty pale. A man watching the floor vanish beneath him. "Petty Officer Pierce," Hannah said, each word controlled with effort. "This is Vice Admiral Riley Hart. She is the commanding officer overseeing this inspection." Logan's mouth opened. No sound came out. Hannah continued, voice lower now, almost dangerous. "She is also the officer whose authorization outranks every person currently standing on this installation." The fog seemed to grow quieter. At the gate, both guards had begun moving quickly toward the dock. Behind them, 2 senior officers emerged from the administrative building. One was tall and broad in a dark service jacket. The other limped slightly, using a cane with practiced irritation. The tall one was Captain Marcus Ellison, base commander of Fort Raven. He was 58, with deep brown skin, close-cropped gray hair, and a face lined by years of difficult command decisions. Marcus had the grave dignity of a man who believed institutions could still be honorable if enough people inside them refused to be cowards. He had served with Riley twice before, once in Bahrain and once during a logistics crisis in Alaska, and he knew her well enough to understand that her silence after humiliation was not mercy. It was measurement. The man with the cane was Commander Blake Sutter, head of the Special Warfare Training School. Blake was 46, lean and sharp-featured, with a trimmed dark beard touched by gray and eyes that always looked as if they were calculating angles. His limp came from an old parachute accident, though he rarely mentioned it unless it benefited him. He smiled easily in public and punished quietly in private. Riley had read his file the night before. It was immaculate in the way files became when too many hands polished them. Marcus reached Riley first. "Vice Admiral Hart," he said, voice tight. "I cannot begin to apologize." "Don't begin, Captain," Riley said. He closed his mouth. Riley peeled her wet jacket away from her skin with 2 fingers and let it fall back against her body. "Hannah," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "What is my 0800 schedule?" Hannah blinked once. Then training took over. Inspection briefing. Command conference room A. Operational review with senior leadership. Falcon Company documentation review. Training observation at 1100. Move the training observation. "Yes, ma'am. I need dry clothes from my transport bag. Already being retrieved." "Good. I want Falcon Company's full personnel roster on my table before 0730. Not the public packet. Full roster." Hannah's face changed slightly. She understood the difference. "Yes, ma'am." Riley looked at Logan again. He stood rigid, as though stillness might save him. It would not. "Petty Officer Pierce," Riley said. His throat moved. "Ma'am, Conference room A0800. Do not be late." He looked almost relieved, which told Riley he did not yet understand anything. That was fine. Understanding could wait. Evidence could not. Riley walked past him. Her shoes left wet prints across the dock. Every step sent cold deeper into her bones, but her spine remained straight. She had learned early that pain did not require an audience. Neither did dignity. Captain Marcus Ellison fell into step beside her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "medical should examine you. They can examine me after I change. With respect." "With respect, Captain, if I wanted to spend my morning being handled by men who failed to recognize authority until it was dripping wet, I would have stayed on the dock." One of the guards coughed into his fist. Hannah did not smile. Marcus's mouth twitched once, almost against his will. "Understood, ma'am." Commander Blake Sutter approached with careful concern arranged on his face. "Admiral Hart," he said, voice smooth. "What happened out there is unacceptable. Pierce is young, but that does not excuse." "No," Riley said. Blake paused. No, Commander. You do not get to reduce this to youth before I know what taught him." The words landed cleanly. Blake's expression held, but Riley saw the flicker behind it. Annoyance. Not fear yet. Fear would come later, if it was deserved. I assure you, Blake said. Falcon Company maintains strict standards. I'm sure your paperwork says so. The fog shifted between them. Marcus looked from Riley to Blake and said nothing. Smart man. The administrative building smelled of floor wax, old coffee, and government heat. An aide led Riley to a small office, where her transport bag had been placed on a chair. Riley closed the door and changed with efficient movements, though her fingers had begun to tremble from the cold. Once alone, she allowed herself one sharp breath through clenched teeth. Her shoulder ached. Her skin burned. Her pride, oddly, did not hurt. Pride was a younger woman's burden. Riley had carried heavier things. She stripped off the wet clothes, toweled her hair, and dressed in dark trousers, a charcoal shirt, and a clean navy jacket. No medals. No decoration. Just rank pins at the collar, small enough to be overlooked by fools and large enough to end conversations. She looked in the mirror only long enough to assess damage. A bruise would form near the shoulder. Her jaw was red. Her eyes were clear. Good. Her phone showed 6 missed messages. 2 from Washington. 1 from Hannah. 1 from an unknown Oregon number. 2 from her father. Riley stared at her father's name. Thomas Hart. She did not open the messages. Not now. Some wounds required privacy, and she had none to spare. At 7:22, she entered conference room A. Hannah Vale had already transformed the room into a battlefield of paper. Folders lined the long table. A secure laptop was open near Riley's seat. Coffee waited in a plain white cup. Not base coffee. Better coffee. Hannah had remembered. Riley picked it up. Bless you, she said. Hannah allowed herself the smallest smile. Figured the river earned you real coffee, ma'am. Careful. Humor suggests optimism. I'll file a correction. Riley took one sip and sat. The first folder was labeled Falcon Company. Injury reports. Previous 8 months. Riley opened it. The room seemed to narrow. 7 injuries. 3 officially attributed to equipment failure. 2 to trainee negligence. 1 to dehydration. 1 to non-training-related fall. She turned pages slowly. The first report involved a trainee named Caleb Monroe, 23, fractured wrist during a rope descent drill. The final report blamed a defective harness clip. The attached medical note, however, described bruising inconsistent with a simple fall. Riley turned another page. The second report involved Isaiah Trent, 25, soft tissue damage to the ribs. Final report, accidental collision with training obstacle. Original triage note. Patient states instructor made physical contact during corrective drill. The sentence had later been removed from the final summary. Riley's eyes stopped moving. There it was. The first thread. Small. Ugly. Familiar. Hannah watched her from the side of the room. What is it? She asked. Riley did not answer immediately. She turned to the third file, then the fourth, then back to the first. Paperwork had a rhythm when it told the truth. Dates lined up. Language varied naturally. Medical descriptions carried the practical messiness of real events. These reports had been cleaned. Too clean. Someone had polished them until the blood disappeared. At 7:46, Captain Marcus Ellison entered with Commander Blake Sutter and 2 department heads. Marcus wore concern openly now. Blake wore composure. Behind them came Major Daniel Cross, the base medical officer, a short, sturdy man in his early 40s with thinning red hair, a round face, and kind eyes made wary by bureaucracy. Daniel carried himself like a doctor who had once believed facts were enough, then spent years learning how often facts needed bodyguards. Riley looked at him. Major Cross. Ma'am, you signed the initial medical notes on 3 of these reports. Daniel's face tightened. Yes, ma'am. But not the final summaries. No, ma'am. Who did? His eyes moved once toward Blake Sutter. Only once. But Riley saw it. Blake saw that she saw it. The room cooled. Riley closed the folder gently. Captain Ellison, she said, before the formal briefing begins, I want all original medical notes associated with Falcon Company training injuries for the past 14 months. I want audit logs for every edited injury report. I want names attached to each edit. I want them before noon. Marcus nodded. You'll have them. Blake stepped forward. Ma'am, with respect, some of those systems require routing through. Then route quickly. His jaw flexed. Of course. Riley leaned back slightly. Also, she said, Petty Officer Pierce will not return to training duties pending review. Blake nodded too fast. Agreed. I'm not finished. He is not to be coached, questioned informally, or prepared by anyone in his chain of command before his 0800 appearance. Blake's expression froze. Marcus turned his head toward him slowly. Riley looked between them. Is that a problem? No, ma'am, Blake said, but his voice had lost a little warmth. At 7:59, Logan Pierce appeared at the door. He looked smaller indoors. Still tall, still muscular, still handsome in a hard-edged way, but the dock had given him distance and fog and the illusion of command. Under fluorescent lights, with his hair damp from sweat and his face drained of color, he looked like what he was, a young man who had mistaken permission for character. Enter, Riley said. Logan stepped inside. No one offered him a chair. Riley let silence gather around him. She had learned that silence did not need to shout. It could simply stand in the room until guilt began speaking first. Vice Admiral, Logan said finally. I apologize for the incident this morning. The incident, Riley repeated. His eyes dropped. I made a mistake. Yes. I didn't know who you were. Riley folded her hands on the table. That is not the part that concerns me. Logan looked up. For the first time, confusion broke through fear. Riley studied him carefully. If I had been a civilian contractor, would you have been allowed to put your hands on me? No, ma'am. If I had been a nurse from base medical? No, ma'am. If I had been a lost spouse? A visiting auditor? A mother looking for her son? His throat moved. No, ma'am. Then your mistake was not failing to recognize my rank. Your mistake was believing rank was the only thing that required restraint. No one moved. Logan's face changed. Not enough to redeem him. Not yet. But enough to show that the sentence had entered somewhere pride did not fully guard. Riley opened the folder in front of her. Who taught you that non-training personnel on the dock should be removed physically? Logan's eyes flicked toward Blake Sutter. There it was again. A small glance. A little thread. Riley followed it silently. No one said physically, Logan answered. Who said removed? Logan hesitated. Chief Vale, he said. Hannah stiffened slightly at the shared last name, though Riley knew they were not related. Chief Vale was already in one of the personnel files. 41, training instructor, former combat swimmer, 2 commendations, 3 informal complaints, none sustained. Riley wrote the name down. Exact words, she said. Logan swallowed. He said the dock was 0 tolerance. Said anyone not cleared for active training hours gets moved. No debate. No exceptions. Moved, Riley repeated. Yes, ma'am. And you interpreted that as throwing a woman into a freezing river. Logan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the arrogance was gone. What remained was uglier in some ways. Shame without direction. Yes, ma'am. Riley looked at him for another moment. Then she closed the folder. You are dismissed to holding status. You will remain available for formal interview. Yes, ma'am. He turned to leave. Petty Officer Pierce. He stopped. Riley's voice softened by a single degree, which somehow made it heavier. This morning, the river corrected your understanding of power. Whether that correction becomes the beginning of wisdom or only the end of your career is up to what you do next. Logan did not answer. He left. Hannah closed the door behind him. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Riley looked at Blake Sutter. Chief Vale's file, she said. Now. Blake's smile returned, thinner than before. Of course, Admiral. Riley watched him leave. Captain Marcus Ellison remained behind. He looked older than he had on the dock. Ma'am, he said quietly, how bad is this? Riley looked down at the injury reports spread across the table. Caleb Monroe. Isaiah Trent. 5 more names beneath them. Young men turned into paperwork. Pain translated into equipment failure. Fear filed under negligence. I don't know yet, she said. Marcus nodded slowly. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. Riley picked up the first altered report again. The edited language was so smooth it nearly shone. That bothered her. Sloppy lies were common. Smooth lies required practice. Outside the conference room windows, morning had finally broken over Fort Raven. The fog lifted from the Columbia River, revealing the dock where Riley had been thrown into the water less than 3 hours earlier. Sailors moved across the compound. Training whistles blew. Engine started. The base continued with the confidence of a machine that did not yet know someone had opened its casing and found blood in the gears. Riley turned another page. At the bottom of the medical note, Nearly hidden beneath an administrative stamp, she saw a line that had not been properly removed. Patient reports instructor contact before fall. Requested confidential review. The request had no follow-up number, no reviewer signature, no resolution. Riley stared at it. There was always a first secret, a small one, a line missed by someone too tired or too confident to erase everything. She reached for her pen and circled the sentence once. Then she wrote in the margin, "Who received this request?" Hannah read it over her shoulder. Her voice was quiet. "Something's being hidden." Riley looked toward the river. "Yes," she said. "And now we find out who was willing to bury it." Riley Hart did not believe in ghosts, but she believed in traces. A ghost was a story people told themselves when they did not want to name what had actually happened. A trace was different. A trace had weight. A trace had ink, timestamps, edit logs, medical initials, careless margins, and the faint pressure mark of a pen pressed too hard by someone who had known the truth and written it anyway. By 8:37 that morning, Conference Room A at Fort Raven Naval Station had become a graveyard of traces. The long table was covered with injury reports, training summaries, medical notes, witness forms, personnel files, and printed audit logs still warm from the base records office. Outside the windows, the Columbia River moved under a thin skin of morning silver, as if it had not tried to pull Riley under less than 3 hours earlier. Inside the room, the air held that particular institutional chill of places where bad news had begun to breathe. Riley sat at the head of the table in a dry navy jacket, her damp hair now tied back with military severity. Her shoulder throbbed from the impact with the river, but she welcomed the pain. Pain was honest. Pain did not revise itself into equipment malfunction because some commander preferred a cleaner file. Across from her, Lieutenant Commander Hannah Vale stood beside a portable scanner, feeding documents through one by one with fast, precise hands. Hannah's dark eyes had sharpened since the dock incident. She had always been competent, but now there was something personal in her silence. Not emotional, not reckless, but personal in the way loyalty becomes a blade once someone proves they are willing to use it. Captain Marcus Ellison stood near the window with one hand resting against the back of a chair. His broad shoulders looked heavier than they had that morning. Marcus was a commander who carried responsibility like an old coat. Familiar, necessary, and not always comfortable. He had spent 3 years running Fort Raven with the belief that discipline and cruelty were not the same thing. The files on the table were beginning to suggest that somewhere under his command, someone had treated that distinction like an inconvenience. Major Daniel Cross sat 2 seats down from Riley, his round face pale beneath his thinning red hair. He wore wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and each time he pushed them back up, his hand trembled slightly. Daniel was not a coward. Riley had met cowards. They disguised fear as policy and hid behind phrases like chain of command. Daniel's fear was different. It had the exhausted smell of a man who had tried to push a stone uphill for too long and was now watching it roll back toward everyone below. Riley opened the first complete file again. "Caleb Monroe," she said. 23 years old. 3rd week of advanced waterborne assault training. Final report says fractured wrist caused by defective harness clip during descent drill. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. Riley looked at him. "Your initial note says the bruising pattern was inconsistent with a harness fall." "Yes, ma'am," Daniel said. "Say it clearly." He swallowed. The injury pattern looked like direct impact trauma, not a standard fall. Not from that angle. Hannah stopped scanning. Marcus turned from the window. Riley did not look away from Daniel. Direct impact from what? Daniel's jaw moved before words came. From contact with a hard object. Possibly the dock edge. Possibly a training obstacle. Possibly he stopped. Possibly a person? Daniel exhaled. "Yes, ma'am." Riley turned a page. "And yet the final report says equipment failure." "I did not write the final report." "Who edited it?" Daniel looked toward the printed audit log. Hannah picked it up before Riley asked and slid it across the table. Riley read the line. "Edited by Sutter.bk. Approved by Kane.vr." Commander Blake Sutter had edited the file. Colonel Victor Kane had approved it. Riley did not react outwardly, but inside, a door opened. Colonel Victor Kane had not yet entered the room that morning. His name, however, had already arrived ahead of him like smoke under a locked door. Riley had read his official biography on the flight in, 49 years old, decorated officer, former Special Operations Group commander, current regional training director overseeing Fort Ravens Falcon Company and 2 satellite programs. The photo in his file showed a handsome man with steel gray eyes, black hair cut short, and a smile controlled enough to seem trustworthy to people who mistook control for integrity. He had the kind of career that looked flawless at a distance. Riley had learned to mistrust flawless things. Nature always left marks. So did honest service. "Where is Colonel Kane?" Riley asked. Marcus answered. "In transit from Portland. His aide says he'll arrive by 1100. Convenient." Marcus's expression tightened. He was not scheduled to attend the opening review until tomorrow. Yet his signature appears on an altered injury report from 6 months ago. No one answered. Riley moved to the second file. Isaiah Trent, 25. Rib trauma. Final report says accidental collision with obstacle during low visibility course. Initial note says patient reported instructor contact during corrective drill. Daniel's face darkened with memory. Isaiah could barely breathe when they brought him in. Who brought him? Chief Aaron Vale and Petty Officer Pierce. At Logan's name, Hannah glanced up. Riley made a note. Was Isaiah willing to speak? At first, Daniel said. He said an instructor hit him hard enough to drop him. Not with a closed fist. More like a shove with the shoulder or forearm. He said it happened after he failed a timed movement. And later, Daniel's gaze lowered to the table. Later he changed his statement. Why? I don't know. Riley let silence settle. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. He looked older in that moment. Not by years, but by burden. I suspected pressure. I didn't have proof. Suspicion should have triggered a protected review. It did, Daniel said, voice low. I filed one. Hannah's fingers paused over the scanner again. Riley's eyes narrowed. Where is it? Daniel gave a humorless little laugh, almost broken. That's the question, isn't it? Marcus stepped closer. Daniel. The major looked at him with something like apology. I filed a confidential clinical safety concern after Isaiah Trent. Then again after Caleb Monroe. Both through the internal reporting portal. Both disappeared from my dashboard within 48 hours. Marcus looked stricken. Why didn't you come to me? Daniel's eyes flashed for the first time. I tried. The words hit the room hard. Marcus went very still. Daniel reached into the folder beside him and pulled out a printed email chain. 3 times, Captain. I requested a private review meeting. Your executive assistant redirected me to Commander Sutter. Then Sutter told me Falcon Company documentation was handled at the regional level because of operational sensitivity. After that, my clinic budget review got moved up by 6 weeks, and my senior corpsman was reassigned without notice. His voice shook now, not with fear, but with the anger of a decent man finally allowed to admit he had been trapped. I have a wife with multiple sclerosis, Daniel continued quietly. 2 kids in school. I am not proud of how cautious I became after that. But caution is not the same as blindness. I kept copies. Riley looked at him for a long second. There it was again. The sacred stubbornness of paper. Where? She asked. Daniel reached beneath his chair and lifted a battered brown leather satchel. It looked old, softened at the corners, the kind of bag a rural doctor might have carried generations earlier. Here. He placed it on the table and opened it. Inside were folders. Not many. Maybe 15. Enough. Hannah inhaled softly. Marcus looked as though someone had struck him. Daniel removed the first folder and slid it toward Riley. Original intake notes. Screenshots from the portal before the reports vanished. Email confirmations. I did not know who to trust, so I trusted the printer. For the first time that morning, Riley allowed herself a faint expression that might have become a smile in another life. Good choice. Daniel looked down. Praise embarrassed him. That told Riley something. At 9:12, Hannah finished scanning the first batch of documents and connected the secure laptop to the base audit archive. The screen filled with columns, file creation dates, modification times, user IDs, access locations. Most people looked at audit logs and saw technical clutter. Riley saw footprints in snow. Show me all edits made after initial medical entry, she said. Hannah filtered the list. Rows collapsed. 23 remained. Marcus leaned over the table. 23. For 14 months. Daniel whispered. Riley's expression did not change. No. For Falcon Company alone. The number sat among them like a loaded weapon. Hannah clicked into the first line. Caleb Monroe's file had been edited twice. Once by Blake Sutter. once by Colonel Victor Kane's administrative account. Isaiah Trent's file had been edited 4 times. A trainee named Omar Ellis had his injury cause changed from possible instructor strike to training obstacle impact. Another named Peter Lang had a concussion note revised to remove the phrase delayed reporting due to fear of reprisal. Another, Andrew Klein, had requested follow-up counseling after a shoulder dislocation and was later marked as refused support services. Riley read each one, slowly, with the terrible patience of a judge listening to names of the dead. At 9:40, the door opened and Commander Blake Sutter entered without knocking. He carried a folder under one arm and wore the expression of a man prepared to appear helpful. In the brighter light of morning, his face seemed even sharper. Narrow cheekbones, dark beard trimmed so carefully it looked drawn on, eyes that moved too quickly and smiled too rarely with the rest of him. Blake had the easy physical confidence of a man who had built his identity around surviving pain, and the subtle cruelty of a man who believed surviving pain gave him permission to distribute it. "Admiral Hart," he said, "I have Chief Vale's file as requested." He placed it on the table. Riley did not touch it yet. "Commander," she said, "why did you edit Caleb Monroe's injury report?" Blake's face did not change, which was more revealing than panic. "Administrative clarification," he said. "Clarification from direct impact trauma to harness malfunction. The final cause was determined after review." "By whom?" "Regional Training Command. Colonel Kane." Blake inclined his head slightly. "Among others." Riley opened Daniel's original note and turned it toward him. "Major Cross documented bruising inconsistent with the final cause. Medical personnel are not always aware of training mechanics." Daniel flinched. Riley saw it. Her voice stayed flat. "Are training personnel always aware of human anatomy?" A faint flush rose along Blake's neck. Marcus looked away, not to spare Blake, but to control himself. Blake folded his hands behind his back. "Admiral, Falcon Company operates under intense physical standards. Injuries happen. Young trainees sometimes misunderstand corrective contact as misconduct because they are exhausted, embarrassed, or looking for reasons to explain failure." There it was. The old language. The spell institutions cast when they wanted pain to sound like weakness. Riley stood. She was not as tall as Blake, but rank changed the dimensions of a room when worn by someone who did not need to announce it. "Commander Sutter," she said, "a fractured wrist is not embarrassment. A concussion is not misunderstanding. A missing protected review is not intensity. Do not bring me poetry when the body has already written prose." Blake's mouth tightened. Hannah's eyes flicked down quickly, hiding something that might have been admiration. Riley picked up Chief Aaron Vale's file. "Where is Chief Vale?" "Running morning evaluation." "Cancel it." Blake hesitated. "Ma'am, the evaluation has already begun." "Then end it." "That will disrupt." Riley looked at him. Blake stopped. "Yes, ma'am. Chief Vale will report here by 10:30. He is not to speak with Petty Officer Pierce first. He is not to speak with Colonel Kane. He is not to review any reports. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Blake turned to leave. Riley stopped him. "Commander." He paused. "If any file access occurs from your account between now and noon without my written authorization, I will treat it as interference." His eyes cooled. "Understood." When he left, the room exhaled. Marcus spoke first. "He's hiding something." Riley sat back down. "Yes." Daniel looked toward the door. "He's not the only one." At 10:18, Hannah found the first reference to Ethan Brooks. It was buried not in the injury files, but in a personnel routing note attached to Falcon Company's climate assessment. The note was brief, almost insultingly plain. "Lieutenant Ethan Brooks reassigned to Naval Support Activity Boise, pending administrative review. Transfer effective September 14th. Reason, leadership compatibility concerns." Hannah read it aloud. Riley looked up. "Leadership compatibility." Daniel's face changed. "Ethan, you know him?" Daniel nodded. Lieutenant Brooks was one of the few officers who took the medical report seriously. 32 years old. Quiet. Tall. Dark hair. Usually looked like he needed sleep. He had this way of listening that made people keep talking even when they meant to stop. The trainees trusted him. Marcus frowned. "I remember the transfer." Sutter said Brooks had trouble adapting to Falcon Company culture. Daniel's laugh was bitter. That part was true. He had trouble adapting to lying. Riley extended her hand. Hannah placed Ethan's file in it. Ethan Brooks's photograph showed a lean man with dark brown skin, close-cut black hair, and serious eyes that seemed older than 32. His face was angular, with a narrow nose and a short beard trimmed close to the jaw. He looked like a man who had learned caution young. His service record was strong: logistics officer, training safety liaison, commendation for emergency response during a maritime accident off San Diego. No disciplinary history until Fort Raven. Then suddenly, difficulty maintaining command cohesion, over-identification with trainees, failure to respect internal resolution processes. Riley had seen assassination attempts written with less elegance. What did he file, she asked. Hannah searched. Nothing. She searched again under Ethan's service number. A blank category returned. Daniel reached into his satchel and removed another paper. It was a printed confirmation receipt from the protected reporting system. Filed by Lt. Ethan Brooks. Subject: Falcon Company injury documentation irregularities and trainee intimidation. Date: August 3rd. Riley read it twice. Where is the complaint? Daniel shook his head. Gone. Who had administrative authority over protected reports? Marcus answered this time, voice grim. Regional Training Command. Colonel Kane's office. Riley's pen stopped. The room changed again. It had moved beyond Sutter now. Beyond Logan. Beyond one dock. One shove. One ugly morning. The shape was widening. Hannah, Riley said, find Ethan Brooks. Already searching, ma'am. The search took 7 minutes. Those 7 minutes felt longer than some battles Riley had survived. At last, Hannah looked up. Current address listed near Boise, Idaho. Assigned to administrative logistics. No active command billet. Phone number available. Riley held out her hand. Hannah gave her the phone. Riley dialed. It rang 4 times. A man answered, cautious and tired. Brooks. Lieutenant Ethan Brooks. A pause. Who is this? Vice Admiral Riley Hart. The silence that followed was not disbelief. It was calculation. Then Ethan said, ma'am. His voice was low, controlled, with the flat restraint of someone who had learned that hope could be used against him. I'm at Fort Raven, Riley said. Another silence. I heard, Ethan replied. News travels. At Fort Raven, fear travels faster. Riley glanced at Marcus. He looked down. I have your complaint receipt, Riley said. I do not have the complaint. No, Ethan said. You wouldn't. Do you have a copy? A breath came through the line. Not relief. Not yet. Several. Riley's pulse remained steady, but something in the room sharpened around her. Where are they? Not on any military system. Good. Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. That was not what my last commanding officer said. I'm not your last commanding officer. No, ma'am. Lieutenant Brooks, I need everything you kept. Original reports, correspondence, names, dates, any supporting material. This time the silence held grief. I kept it because I thought somebody might come one day, Ethan said. Then months passed, and nobody did. Riley let that land. She did not rush to comfort him. False comfort was just another kind of insult. Somebody came, she said. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. When he spoke again, his voice had changed by a fraction. There's more than paperwork. Hannah looked up sharply. Riley said, explain. I have an audio recording. September 9th. Conference room behind the old dive locker. Colonel Victor Kane, Commander Sutter, Chief Aaron Vale, and one other officer from regional staff. I wasn't supposed to be outside the room, but I was waiting for Kane to sign a transfer packet. What is on the recording? They discussed the Monroe and Trent reports. Kane says injury numbers were threatening Falcon Company's readiness rating. Sutter says medical language was creating unnecessary exposure. Chief Vale says trainees who couldn't handle correction shouldn't be allowed to control the narrative. Daniel's face went gray. Marcus closed his eyes. Riley's voice remained calm. Did they mention altering records? Yes, ma'am. Directly? Yes. Did they mention your complaint? A pause. Yes. Riley leaned back slightly. Ethan continued. Kane said I had become a contamination point. Those were his words. Sutter said transferring me was cleaner than disciplining me because discipline created appeal rights. They laughed about that. No one in conference room moved. Outside, a training whistle blew across the base, bright and ordinary. Riley looked at the injury files. The names. The edited lines. The missing reviews. Lieutenant Brooks, she said, listen carefully. Do not send that recording to any base address. Do not send it to anyone who has contacted you previously about this matter. Do not discuss this call with former colleagues. I understand. Do you trust your current location? No. The answer came too quickly. Riley understood it immediately. Ethan Brooks had spent months living like a hunted document, checking mirrors, sleeping lightly, saving copies in places he hoped fear could not reach. Where are the files? Riley asked. 3 locations. 1 encrypted drive in Boise. 1 physical packet with my sister in Denver. 1 copy with an attorney in Missoula who doesn't know what it is, only that it matters. Good, Riley thought. Very good. Your sister's name? Naomi Brooks. 38. Public school principal. She has no military connection. Riley wrote the name. Naomi Brooks entered the story only as a safeguard for now, but Riley pictured her briefly. A woman outside this world. Probably practical. Probably tired of her brother pretending he was fine. Sitting somewhere in Colorado with an envelope that carried more danger than most people ever touched. Do you still have the audio? Yes. Can you access it now? Yes. I'm going to give you a secure upload channel controlled by my office. You will send the audio in a document index. After that, you will remain available. If anyone contacts you about Fort Raven before my staff does, you do not answer. Ethan exhaled. Ma'am. Yes. I need to ask something. Ask. Is this real? Riley did not pretend not to understand. He was not asking whether she was truly at Fort Raven. He was asking whether the door that had closed on him months ago had actually opened again, or whether this was another hallway leading to another locked room. Yes, Riley said. It is real. His breath caught once, very quietly. Then he said, I'll send it. The call ended. For several seconds, the room remained silent. Henna's fingers flew over the keyboard, building the secure upload link. Daniel sat with both hands clasped, knuckles white. Marcus looked out toward the base with an expression Riley recognized. The face of a commander beginning to understand that his house had hidden rooms. At 10:31, Chief Aaron Vale arrived. He entered with the physical ease of a man accustomed to being feared in small rooms. Aaron Vale was 41, 6 feet, compact rather than bulky, with shaved dark hair, pale skin weathered by wind, and a thick neck that seemed to rise straight into his jaw. His nose had been broken at least twice. A faded tattoo disappeared under the sleeve of his training shirt. He had light green eyes, not bright, not warm, but watchful in the way of predators that had learned patience. He glanced at Riley, then Marcus, then Daniel Cross, and his gaze lingered on the files just long enough. Chief Vale, Riley said. Sit. He sat. Unlike Logan, Aaron did not look afraid. That interested Riley. Men like Aaron did not fear consequences until consequences learned their names. You gave Petty Officer Pierce instructions about removing unauthorized personnel from the dock, Riley said. Aaron's face remained blank. I gave standard security guidance. Did that guidance include physical removal? No, ma'am. What did it include? Verbal direction. Escort if necessary. Define escort. His eyes flickered. Walk them off the training area. Not throw them into the river. No, ma'am. Riley opened Isaiah Trent's file. Did you make physical contact with Isaiah Trent during a corrective drill? Aaron's jaw tightened. Training contact occurs. Did you strike him? No. Did you shove him? No. Did you tell him reporting instructor contact would affect his performance review? No, ma'am. Did you tell Caleb Monroe that trainees who created paperwork rarely completed the program? The first crack appeared. Tiny. A tightening beside the mouth. No, ma'am. Riley slid Daniel's original note across the table. Major Cross documented trainee statements before the reports were changed. Aaron did not look at Daniel. Trainees say many things under stress. Riley nodded once. Yes. So do instructors under investigation. Aaron's eyes hardened. There he was. For the first time, the man behind the training mask looked out. Riley did not push further. Not yet. Aaron Vale would deny until denial cost more than truth. She had no need to spend evidence before it matured. You are relieved from active instruction pending review, Riley said. Aaron's face flushed. Ma'am, with respect. Do not confuse those words with a request. His jaw worked once. Yes, ma'am. You will remain on base. You will not contact current or former Falcon Company trainees. You will not discuss this review with Commander Sutter, Colonel Kane, or Petty Officer Pierce. You will surrender your duty phone to Lieutenant Commander Hannah Vale before leaving this room. Now he looked afraid. Not much. Enough. My phone contains operational contacts, he said. Then it will be handled carefully. I'd like to speak with Commander Sutter. No. The word landed like a door closing. Aaron stared at Riley, and in his eyes she saw the calculation change. He had entered the room thinking this was a weather front he could wait out. Now he was beginning to realize the storm had a name. Hannah stepped forward with an evidence bag. After a long moment, Aaron removed the phone and placed it inside. When he left, his back was stiff. Daniel whispered, "He's going to warn them somehow." Riley watched the door close. "Probably." Marcus turned to her. "Then why let him leave?" "Because people reveal networks when they panic." At 11:04, Ethan Brooks uploaded the first files. Hannah connected the secure drive to the room display. Folder after folder appeared. Riley read the index. Original medical summaries. Screenshots of deleted complaints. Email chains. Personal notes. Transfer documents. Audio file. 09_SCP_Falcon_review. Hannah looked at Riley. Riley nodded. The audio began with muffled movement. A chair scraping. A door closing. Then Blake Sutter's voice, unmistakable even through the poor recording quality. "The medical language is the problem. Cross keeps writing like he's building a case." Then another voice, deeper, smoother, with command polished into every syllable. "Colonel Victor Kane. Cross writes what he sees. That is inconvenient, not surprising. The question is why those notes are surviving into final reports." Aaron Vale's voice followed, rougher. "Because Brooks keeps asking for review numbers. Trainees talk to him. He thinks being their friend is leadership." Sutter said. Brooks filed again. Kane's reply came after a pause. "Then Brooks becomes the issue." Daniel lowered his head. The recording continued. Kane spoke about readiness ratings, congressional attention, injury thresholds, and the danger of allowing subjective trainee narratives to compromise objective performance metrics. The words were bloodless, clean, almost elegant. They turned broken wrists into numbers and fear into data contamination. Then Sutter said, "Monroe's file still has Cross's original language attached." Kane answered, "Remove it from the final packet. Archive the original under restricted medical access. If anyone asks, the final determination superseded preliminary observations." Riley's pen stopped moving. There it was. Direct. Unmistakable. Marcus looked sick. Hannah's face had gone hard. Aaron Vale's recorded voice returned. "And Trent." Kane said, "Same approach. No instructor contact language leaves this building. If a trainee wants to graduate, he learns what to remember." Daniel pushed his chair back slightly, as if needing distance from the sound. The audio crackled. Sutter laughed once. "And Brooks." Kane's voice cooled. "Transfer. Do not discipline him. Discipline creates records. Compatibility concerns are cleaner." The recording ended 3 minutes later. No one spoke for a long time. Riley had heard many ugly things in her career. Men begging. Men lying. Men justifying the unjustifiable with trembling lips and polished shoes. But there was a special coldness in hearing cruelty spoken administratively. No shouting. No rage. Just method. Just procedure wrapped around harm until harm looked official. Marcus broke the silence. "I failed them." Riley looked at him. "Yes." He flinched, but did not look away. Then she added, "You are not the only one. But you are the one in this room who can decide whether failure becomes concealment or correction." Marcus absorbed that like a man accepting sentence and mission together. "What do you need?" he asked. "Full access. No routing delays. No courtesy warnings. Colonel Kane is not to receive a private briefing before he arrives." Marcus nodded. "Done. Hannah, duplicate Ethan's upload to my Washington office and lock the local copy." "Yes, ma'am." "Major Cross, prepare a list of every trainee you treated whose final report differed from your notes." Daniel straightened slowly. Something in him had shifted. Fear had not vanished, but purpose had entered the room and given fear a job. "Yes, ma'am." At 11:22, a message appeared on Hannah's screen. Colonel Victor Kane had entered Fort Raven through the north gate. Riley read the notification once. Then she looked at the table. The altered files. The original notes. Ethan's recording. Daniel's hidden satchel. Aaron Vale's surrendered phone. Logan Pierce's disastrous shove. All of it connected now, not by suspicion, but by structure. She stood. Outside, a black government SUV moved along the main road toward the administrative building. It passed rows of flags snapping in the river wind. For a moment, sunlight caught the windshield, hiding the driver, hiding the passenger, turning the vehicle into a moving piece of glare. Riley thought of the Columbia River closing over her head before dawn. She thought of Logan's hand on her arm. She thought of Ethan Brooks sitting alone in Idaho with copies of the truth because no one had come when he first called. She thought of young men learning that their pain could be rewritten by men with clean uniforms and protected passwords. Then she buttoned her jacket. "This is not a discipline problem," she said. Hannah looked at her. "No, ma'am." Marcus's voice was quiet. "What is it?" Riley watched Colonel Victor Kane's SUV stop outside. Colonel Victor Kane did not enter Fort Raven like a guilty man. He entered like a man who had spent his entire life teaching rooms to make space for him. Riley Hart watched him through the glass wall of the administrative corridor as he stepped out of the black SUV. He was 49, tall but not broad, with the lean, controlled body of a man who still trained because appearance was part of command. His black hair was trimmed close at the sides, silver beginning at the temples with almost theatrical precision. His face was handsome in a cold, official way. Straight nose, firm jaw, clean-shaven skin, and steel-gray eyes that seemed practiced at looking concerned without ever becoming vulnerable. The wind pushed at his dark coat, but he did not hurry. Men like Kane rarely hurried unless they wanted others to mistake urgency for importance. Beside him walked a young aide Riley had not seen before, Lieutenant Grace Holloway. Grace was maybe 27, slim, pale-skinned, with auburn hair pinned so tightly it seemed painful. She carried a tablet against her chest like a shield. Her eyes moved quickly from the building to the guards to the windows, and Riley could tell at once that Grace was not dangerous. Not yet. She was frightened, polished, and ambitious in the way young officers became when they worked too long under men who rewarded obedience and called it professionalism. Captain Marcus Ellison stood beside Riley, his face grim. "That is Colonel Kane. I know. He'll come in smiling." "Of course he will," Riley said. "A smile is cheaper than a lawyer." Marcus looked at her, and despite everything, something like a tired laugh almost reached his mouth. It died before it arrived. Behind them, Lieutenant Commander Hannah Vale was still working at the secure laptop, transferring Ethan Brooks's documents to Riley's Washington office and building a clean evidence index. Major Daniel Cross sat across the table from her, carefully listing every trainee whose final injury report had differed from his original medical note. He wrote slowly, not because he lacked memory, but because each name seemed to cost him something. Riley turned from the window. Her shoulders still ached from the river, a dull pulse under the collarbone. She ignored it. "Captain," she said, "you will greet Colonel Kane in the main hallway. You will not brief him privately. You will bring him directly here." Marcus nodded. "Hannah, keep the audio file locked." "Yes, ma'am." "Major Cross, if Colonel Kane asks why you're here, you answer only that you were requested by me." Daniel looked up. "And if he presses?" Riley's expression did not change. "Then he can learn patience." 3 minutes later, Colonel Victor Kane entered conference room A with Lieutenant Grace Holloway half a step behind him. Kane smiled exactly as Riley expected. Warm enough for witnesses. Modest enough for plausible humility. Controlled enough to suggest that he had already decided what version of reality everyone would be allowed to discuss. "Vice Admiral Hart," Kane said, extending a hand. "I regret that my arrival comes after such an unfortunate morning." Riley shook his hand once. His grip was firm, dry, rehearsed. "Colonel Kane, I was informed there was an incident on the dock." "There was. I want to assure you that Fort Raven's Regional Training Command takes any failure of professionalism very seriously." Riley released his hand. "Good. Then you'll be useful." The smile remained, but his eyes sharpened. He glanced at the folders on the table. One glance only. A disciplined glance. But Riley saw what he recognized. His own signature, his own edit chain, his own name walking toward him from paper. "May I ask what this is?" Kane said. "An inspection. Of course. I meant the scope. That is expanding." Grace Holloway's fingers tightened around her tablet. Kane did not look at her, but Riley noticed the slight shift in his posture, a silent command telling the young aide not to react. "Expanding in what direction?" he asked. "Riley Saturday, toward the truth." No one took a breath loudly enough to be heard. Kane lowered himself into the chair across from Riley. He did it gracefully, as if choosing to cooperate were a gift. Admiral, I am happy to assist, but I would caution against drawing conclusions from incomplete documentation. Training records can appear inconsistent when removed from operational context. Riley opened the Monroe file. Then let's add context. She slid the report toward him. Kane looked down. Caleb Monroe, Riley said. Fractured wrist. Initial medical note indicates trauma inconsistent with harness failure. Final report records defective equipment. Your approval is on the final report. Kane glanced over the page. I approve hundreds of reports. I'm sure. A regional commander relies on subordinate review. Conveniently. His eyes lifted. That was not a defense. It was an explanation. Then explain better. Grace Holloway looked at Riley as if no one had ever spoken to Kane that way in her presence. Kane leaned back slightly. The final determination came after training staff reviewed the equipment, trainee performance, and environmental factors. Medical notes capture early impressions. They do not always reflect the complete event. Major Daniel Cross spoke before Riley could. My medical notes reflected the body. The room turned toward him. Daniel's face had gone red, but his voice was steady. Bodies are not early impressions, Colonel. Bruising has direction. Fractures have mechanisms. Soft tissue damage tells a story whether command likes the story or not. Kane looked at him with mild disappointment, the way a teacher might look at a student who had embarrassed himself. Major Cross, he said, I respect medical expertise. But medical personnel do not always understand the pressures of elite training. Daniel's hands curled on the table. Riley said, Careful, Colonel. Kane turned back to her. Ma'am, you are one sentence away from suggesting that elite training requires falsified injuries. The smile faded at last. There, Riley thought. Now the mask knew it had been touched. Kane folded his hands. I would never suggest that. Good. At the far end of the room, Hannah's laptop chimed softly. Riley did not look at it, but Hannah did. Her eyes paused, then moved to Riley. A signal. Something new had arrived. Riley stood. Colonel Kane, you will remain available in this building until further notice. You will not contact Commander Sutter, Chief Aaron Vale, Petty Officer Logan Pierce, or any current or former member of Falcon Company without my written approval. Kane's voice lowered. That is an unusual restriction. Yes. On what authority? Riley looked at him with the calm expression of a woman who had been thrown into a freezing river before breakfast and considered this conversation the less dangerous part of her day. Mine. Kane held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stood. Grace Holloway stood with him, too quickly. Admiral, he said, I hope this investigation remains fair. Riley almost smiled. So do I. After Kane left, the room did not relax. It tightened. Hannah turned the laptop toward Riley. Ma'am. New message through the secure upload channel. From Ethan Brooks. Riley read the subject line. Noah Carter will talk. Beneath it was a phone number and a note. He witnessed Monroe. He was scared. He may still be on base. Riley looked at Marcus. Find Noah Carter. Marcus did not hesitate. Yes, ma'am. Noah Carter arrived 40 minutes later through the side entrance of the administrative building, escorted by a senior chief Riley trusted only because Marcus had chosen him personally. Noah was 24, shorter than most of the men in Falcon Company, with a wiry frame, light brown skin, close-cropped black curls, and a nervous energy that made him seem younger than he was. His left cheek had a faint line of old acne scars, and his eyes were large, dark, and constantly searching for exits. He wore his uniform neatly, but his hands would not stay still. They kept opening and closing on his knees after he sat in the small interview room Riley had chosen instead of the larger conference room. The room was plain, one table, for chairs, a wall clock, a window looking out toward the motor pool. Riley sat across from him. Hannah sat to the side with a recorder and notebook. Marcus remained outside the door by Riley's order. Too many commanders in the room could turn truth back into fear. Noah Carter, Riley said gently, you are not under disciplinary interview. You requested to speak through Lieutenant Brooks. Noah swallowed. Yes, ma'am. You understand this conversation can be protected. Yes, ma'am. You also understand that lying in this room helps the people who frightened you. His eyes flicked to hers. That sentence reached him. Noah looked down at his hands. I didn't know Ethan would actually get through to you. Ethan kept records. Noah gave a small, painful nod. Yeah. He always told us paper was the only thing command couldn't intimidate if you made enough copies. Riley waited. Noah's breathing changed. He was walking towards something inside himself and dreading the arrival. I saw what happened to Caleb Monroe, he said. Hannah's pen moved. Riley did not. Noah continued. It wasn't the harness. The harness was fine. We were on the descent drill by the old dock tower, the one near the south training lane. Caleb missed a timing call. Not badly. Just late. Chief Vale got in his face. Caleb said he understood. Chief Vale told him understanding was what people said when they wanted mercy. Noah stopped. His throat worked. Riley kept her voice low. Take your time. Noah let out a shaky breath. Chief Vale grabbed Caleb by the vest and slammed him sideways into the dock rail. Caleb tried to catch himself. His wrist hit the edge wrong. I heard it. His eyes closed. I still hear it sometimes, he said. That sound. Like a branch snapping under a boot. The clock ticked. Hannah's face remained professional, but her eyes had softened. Noah opened his eyes again. Caleb went down. He tried not to scream. That was the worst part. He was trying to be tough for the man who broke him. Riley felt the words settle somewhere deep. Trying to be tough for the man who broke him. That was how poison cultures survived. They trained the injured to defend the injury as proof they belonged. What happened next? Riley asked. Chief Vale told us nobody saw anything except equipment failure. He said Caleb's harness shifted because Caleb panicked. Said if anyone wrote otherwise, the whole team would lose evaluation status and repeat the phase. Collective punishment. Yes, ma'am. Did Commander Sutter know? Noah's laugh came out hollow. Commander Sutter came down 10 minutes later. He looked at Caleb's wrist, looked at the harness, and said, That's our story, then. Hannah's pen stopped for half a beat. Riley said, exact words. Yes, ma'am. That's our story, then. Noah wiped his palms on his trousers. Later, Lieutenant Brooks asked me what happened. I told him enough. Not all of it. I was scared. He said fear was understandable, but silence had a cost. Then 2 weeks later, he was gone. Did anyone threaten you directly? Noah looked at the window. Chief Vale said I had a good career ahead of me if I learned the difference between truth and usefulness. Riley's jaw tightened. There it was again. The language of rot. Truth treated as an obstacle. Usefulness treated as loyalty. Did you sign any statement? Yes. I signed that I inspected Caleb's harness and saw a damaged clip. Was the clip damaged? Afterward. Riley leaned forward slightly. Explain. Noah looked at her, fear rising again. I saw Chief Vale take a tool to it. Pliers, I think. Behind the equipment shed. He bent the clip. Just enough. Then he gave it to the safety officer. Hannah's eyes lifted from her notes. Riley felt the entire case shift weight. Not just false reporting. Fabricated physical evidence. Who was the safety officer? Petty Officer Logan Pierce. The name entered the room like a stone dropped into deep water. Riley held still. Logan again. Did Pierce know the clip had been damaged after the injury? She asked. Noah shook his head slowly. I don't think so. He looked confused. Chief Vale told him Caleb must have missed it during pre-check. Pierce wrote it down. Riley leaned back. A new shape emerged inside the old one. Logan Pierce had harmed her. He had placed his hand on her arm and shoved her into the Columbia River with the arrogance of a man trained to move people instead of hear them. But he might also have been used before he knew he was useful. He had been taught a pattern, given phrases, given authority without wisdom, given a role in a lie and praised for performing it cleanly. That did not absolve him, but it explained the soil he had grown in. Noah, Riley said, why come forward now? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she did not expect. Because you climbed out. Riley said nothing. Noah's voice grew rough. When people hurt you here, they expect you to disappear. Caleb disappeared into medical. Ethan disappeared to Idaho. Mason disappeared into rehab. Complaints disappeared. Notes disappeared. Everybody disappears. But you didn't. You came out of the river and made them sit in a room with paper. Hannah looked down quickly. Riley's chest tightened in a place no river could reach. Noah continued. I thought maybe if you could do that, I could say what I saw. For one rare second, Riley had no answer ready. Then she said, You just did. Noah nodded, and his shoulders dropped as if someone had cut a wire holding them up. After he left, Riley remained seated in the interview room. Hannah turned off the recorder. He's credible, Hannah said. Yes. And terrified. Yes. Do you think Logan knew? Riley looked through the window toward the training yard. In the distance, Logan Pierce stood outside a holding office with 2 guards nearby. His arms were crossed, but the posture no longer looked defiant. It looked like a man trying to hold himself together while the world he trusted changed its name. I think Logan knew what he was taught to know, Riley said. That's not innocence. No, Riley replied. It's damage wearing a uniform. By early afternoon, the investigation had become impossible to contain inside one conference room. Word had moved through Fort Raven, not openly, not in announcements, but in glances, paused conversations, sudden silences when certain officers passed. Young sailors who had avoided the administrative building all morning now found reasons to walk near it. A supply clerk delivered printer paper and whispered to Hannah that someone named Mason Reed had been asking whether Admiral Hart was really taking statements. A corpsman left a sticky note on Daniel Cross's satchel with 3 names and the words, "Ask about night swim, March 18th. Riley did not chase every whisper. Whispers were weather. Evidence was terrain. At 1400, Hannah located Mason Reed. He was not on base. He was at Cascadia Rehabilitation Center outside Salem, Oregon, 2 hours away, recovering from a training injury that Falcon Company records described as non-training-related fall during personal time. Daniel Cross stared at that line with visible disgust. Mason did not fall during personal time, he said. Riley looked up. You treated him? Briefly. He came in with spinal compression symptoms, left leg weakness, severe bruising across the lower back. He said he slipped in the barracks shower. Did you believe him? No. Why? Daniel's expression tightened. Because men who slip in showers usually invent embarrassment. Mason looked like he was reciting a hostage note. Riley asked for the full medical transfer file. It arrived 20 minutes later. Mason Reed was 26. His official photo showed a broad-shouldered young man with olive skin, thick dark blonde hair, and hazel eyes that seemed almost too open for the world he had entered. His smile in the photo was wide and unguarded. Riley hated that most of all. The before smiles always made the after files harder to read. The injury had ended his active training status. Possible long-term nerve damage. Ongoing rehabilitation. Administrative separation pending. Riley read the final line twice. Pending. Not completed. That meant Mason still belonged to the system that had hurt him. Systems loved unfinished people. They could still be pressured. Riley called Cascadia Rehabilitation Center herself. A woman answered with the warm firmness of someone who had spent years protecting patients from impatient relatives and insurance representatives. Her name was Dr. Lillian Shaw. She was 43, tall and slender, with copper-brown skin, short natural curls, and a voice that carried both kindness and steel. When Riley introduced herself, Lillian did not become impressed. She became cautious. Riley respected her immediately. I need to speak with Mason Reed, Riley said. Is this about his military discharge? It is about the injury that led to it. A pause. Dr. Shaw lowered her voice. Then I'll ask you plainly, Admiral. Are you here to help that young man, or to make him sign another version of something that hurts him? Riley closed her eyes briefly. Good, she thought. Someone had been guarding him. I am here to help him tell the truth, Riley said. If he chooses to. Dr. Shaw was silent for 3 seconds. Then she said, he has been waiting for someone to say that without sounding like they were selling it. Mason came on the line 5 minutes later. His voice was quiet. Ma'am. Mason Reed. Yes, ma'am. This is Vice Admiral Riley Hart. I know. You know? Everyone knows now. His attempt at humor was faint, brittle. Riley let it pass gently. I'm reviewing Falcon Company injury reports. Your file says you fell during personal time. Mason breathed in. The line filled with the soft mechanical sounds of a rehabilitation facility. Wheels rolling, distant voices, a monitor toned somewhere far away. I signed that, Mason said. I know. I signed it twice. I know. They told me if I didn't, I'd be marked as unstable, non-compliant. They said my benefits would get complicated. Who told you? A long silence. Then Mason said, Commander Sutter first. Chief Vale later. Colonel Kane didn't talk to me directly. He didn't need to. Riley looked at Hannah, who had begun recording with Mason's consent. What happened to your back, Mason? His breath shook. We were doing night water recovery drills. March 18th. I missed a signal. I came out of the water too slow. Chief Vale said slow men drown teams. Later, behind the equipment bay, He made me repeat weighted carries after everyone else had gone. Commander Sutter was there. Not the whole time. Enough. Mason stopped. Riley waited. He kicked my legs out during the carry. Mason said. I fell with the weight on my back. Something went wrong immediately. I couldn't feel my left foot right. I told them. Chief Vale said nerves were fear leaving the body. Daniel Cross looked away, jaw clenched. Mason continued, voice thinner now. Sutter told me if I reported instructor involvement, I'd be reviewed for psychological failure under stress. He said medical separation with a clean personal accident would be better for my future. He made it sound like mercy. There was the myth again. Mercy as a mask for control. Riley's voice was quiet. Did you believe him? Mason gave a small broken laugh. I wanted to. That's worse, isn't it? No, Riley said. That's human. For a moment, Mason did not speak. Then he said, I have something. Riley straightened. What? A letter. Not official. Sutter wrote notes on my draft statement. Told me what to change. I kept the draft. Where is it? With Dr. Shaw. She made a copy after I told her I thought I was losing my mind. Across the line, Riley heard Dr. Shaw say something softly in the background. Mason's voice changed. She believed me before I did. Riley wrote Dr. Shaw's name beside Mason's. Do I need to come there? Mason asked. No, Riley said. Not today. You stay where your doctors need you. We will arrange a protected statement. Will it matter? Riley looked at the Monroe file. The Trent file. The audio from Ethan. Noah's testimony. The hidden satchel. Logan's borrowed arrogance. Kane's polished smile. Yes, she said. It already does. When the call ended, Daniel Cross stood abruptly and walked to the window. He pressed one hand against the frame and lowered his head. Riley gave him 10 seconds. Then she said, Major. He turned. His eyes were wet, but his voice was controlled. I signed his transfer summary. Under pressure? Yes. Did you know the file was false? I suspected. I asked for a review. Sutter told me Mason had chosen not to contest it. He showed me the signed statement. Daniel swallowed. I let that be enough. Riley did not soften the truth. It wasn't. No, ma'am. But you kept records. Yes. Then use them. Daniel nodded slowly. Outside, the afternoon clouds gathered over the Columbia, darkening the water until it resembled hammered iron. Fort Raven continued to move around them. Trucks, flags, sailors, orders, engines, 1,000 daily motions of an institution that had not yet understood how much had changed. But inside Conference Room A, the truth had gained witnesses. Noah Carter had seen Caleb Monroe's wrist broken and the harness clip damaged afterward. Mason Reed had signed a false statement under threat of losing his future. Ethan Brooks had kept the documents and the recording. Daniel Cross had kept the original medical notes. And Logan Pierce, brutal, foolish Logan Pierce, was beginning to look less like the first cause of the story and more like one of its symptoms. Riley stood over the table and drew a line connecting the names. Vale to Sutter. Sutter to Kane. Kane to altered reports. Altered reports to broken men. Broken men to silence. Silence to culture. Culture to command. The pattern was no longer hiding. It was standing in the room with them. Hannah looked at the board Riley had begun building from names, dates, and evidence tags. Ma'am, she said softly, this wasn't just allowed. Riley capped her pen. No, she said. It was taught. The board on the wall remained untouched for nearly 10 minutes after Riley spoke the words. It was taught. Nobody in Conference Room A argued. Because everyone in the room understood what separated corruption from culture. Corruption could exist inside a person. Culture existed inside a system. A corrupt man could be removed. A corrupt culture survived removals. It adapted. It promoted replacements. It trained the next generation to protect the same lies. Riley had spent 30 years watching institutions confuse those two things. That confusion had destroyed careers, families, and sometimes lives. Outside, dark clouds continued gathering over the Columbia River. The afternoon light faded into a dull gray that made Fort Raven seem older than it was. Trucks moved through the base. Training whistles echoed from distant fields. Somewhere beyond the administration building, recruits continued drills completely unaware that the foundation beneath their command structure had begun to crack. At 3:07 p.m., Hannah's laptop chimed again. The sound instantly pulled everyone's attention. What is it? Riley asked. Hannah opened the message. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, Just enough. Another witness. Riley stood. Name. Hannah read the screen. Petty Officer Second Class, Trevor Mills. The name meant nothing to Riley. Not yet. But Hannah continued reading. He says he worked in equipment control for Falcon Company. He says he knows how damaged equipment was created after injuries occurred. The room became silent. Daniel Cross slowly lowered his pen. Marcus Ellison swore quietly under his breath. Riley looked toward the evidence board. Noah Carter had already described Chief Aaron Vale damaging a harness clip after Caleb Monroe's injury. Now a second witness was describing something similar. Patterns were becoming procedures. Procedures were becoming policy. Bring him in, Riley said. 45 minutes later, Trevor Mills arrived. He looked nothing like a whistleblower. He looked exhausted. Trevor was 31 years old, tall and thin, with sandy brown hair that seemed permanently disorganized. His nose leaned slightly to the left from an old break, and dark circles hung beneath his eyes. His uniform fit correctly, but lacked the sharp perfection common among career climbers. He looked like a man who spent more time fixing problems than polishing appearances. Years ago, Trevor had wanted to become a special warfare operator himself. A severe knee injury during selection ended that dream. The injury never fully healed. Neither did the disappointment. Instead, he transferred into equipment logistics and eventually became responsible for inspection records inside Falcon Company. The experience had changed him. He had stopped believing promotions always went to the best people. He had started paying attention, and paying attention could be dangerous. Trevor sat down heavily. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, from anger held too long. Thank you for coming, Riley said. Trevor nodded. Lieutenant Brooks contacted me months ago. Riley exchanged a glance with Hannah. Ethan? Yeah. His voice softened slightly. He was one of the only officers who ever listened. Riley had heard that sentence before. From Noah. From Daniel. From Mason. A reputation repeated by different people often revealed more truth than an official evaluation. What do you know? Riley asked. Trevor leaned forward. You know about the reports. Yes. You know about the equipment. Some of it. Trevor looked directly at her. No, ma'am. His voice hardened. You don't. The room became very still. Trevor reached into his backpack. Marcus instinctively shifted position. Trevor immediately raised both hands. Sorry. Then he pulled out a thick notebook. Not military issue. Not official. A cheap black notebook with frayed corners. The kind bought at a grocery store. The kind nobody paid attention to. The most dangerous kind. Trevor placed it on the table. I started keeping notes 18 months ago. Daniel inhaled sharply. Trevor opened the notebook. Every page contained dates. Names. Equipment serial numbers. Maintenance records. Replacement requests. Inspection notes. Riley slowly turned pages. The entries were meticulous. Obsessive. Beautiful. The work of a man who no longer trusted computers. Or supervisors. Or official systems. What am I looking at? Riley asked. Trevor pointed to one page. Serial number F1128. Hannah typed quickly. The equipment appeared on screen. Caleb Monroe's harness. Trevor nodded. Look at the inspection date. Riley did. The harness had passed inspection 2 days before Caleb's injury. No defects. No damage. Nothing. Trevor flipped forward. 3 pages later. A replacement request. Damaged clip. Issued after injury. Riley's eyes narrowed. Keep going. Trevor turned another page. And another. And another. The same pattern appeared repeatedly. Healthy equipment. Injury. Sudden damage discovered afterward. Replacement request. Closed investigation. Healthy equipment. Injury. Sudden damage discovered afterward. Replacement request. Closed investigation. 21 separate cases. Daniel slowly sat back. My God. Trevor nodded. That's what I said. Riley looked up. Why keep this? Trevor laughed. Not happily. Because I started feeling crazy. Nobody interrupted. Trevor continued. The first time, I assumed it was coincidence. He pointed to one entry. Then it happened again. Another. And again. Another. Then one night, I watched Chief Vale bring a damaged carabiner into equipment control after midnight. Trevor's jaw tightened. He told me to backdate the inspection report. The room froze. What did you do? Riley asked. I refused. And? Trevor smiled bitterly. He told me if I wanted to keep my position, I'd learn the difference between being right and being useful. The exact phrase. Noah Carter had heard it. Now Trevor had too. Riley wrote it down. Same language. Same conditioning. Same source. Trevor continued. I eventually signed the paperwork. Why? His eyes lowered. My wife was pregnant. Nobody spoke. My son was due in 6 weeks. His voice cracked. I told myself one report didn't matter. Daniel looked away. Trevor laughed again. A horrible sound. Funny thing about compromises. What? They never stay small. The room remained silent. Because everyone understood. Trevor flipped to the final section of the notebook. The handwriting changed. Became faster. More urgent. What's this? Riley asked. Trevor looked at her. This is where I started tracking people. The temperature inside the room seemed to drop. Explain. Trevor pointed. Names. Dates. Transfers. Resignations. Medical separations. Every trainee who had complained. Every instructor who questioned reports. Every officer who asked too many questions. Including Ethan Brooks. Including Mason Reed. Including several names Riley had never seen before. One name appeared repeatedly. More than any other. Riley noticed it immediately. Sergeant First Class Owen Mercer. Who is Owen Mercer? Trevor's expression changed. Fear. Real fear. Owen was Falcon Company's senior instructor before Aaron Vale. What happened to him? Trevor swallowed. He disagreed with Colonel Kane. Riley waited. Trevor looked toward the door, as if making sure nobody else could hear. Then he spoke quietly. Owen filed a formal complaint. Hannah stopped typing. Marcus slowly turned around. Riley remained still. What happened? Trevor's answer came immediately. They destroyed him. Nobody moved. Trevor continued. They opened 4 separate investigations. Into what? Everything. His voice grew bitter. Travel expenses. Equipment requests. Personnel evaluations. Training budgets. He laughed. They searched his entire life until they found something. What? A paperwork mistake. Daniel stared. That's all. Trevor nodded. A paperwork mistake worth $300. The room became silent. He lost his command. Trevor looked down. Lost his marriage, too. Riley felt something cold settle inside her. Predators always wanted examples. Examples taught obedience. Examples kept systems alive. What happened to Mercer? Trevor's answer came quietly. He resigned. And now? No idea. Riley wrote the name. Big letters. Circle around it. The first major whistleblower. The missing piece before Ethan. At 4:21 p.m., Hannah received another message. This one came from Ethan Brooks. The subject line contained only 2 words. Mercer Lives. The room instantly focused. Hannah opened it. Inside was an address. Northern Idaho. A phone number. In 1 sentence. He never stopped keeping records. Riley looked at the message. Then at the board. Then at Marcus. Marcus understood immediately. We need to talk to him. Yes. Marcus checked his watch. It's nearly evening. Then we call. Within minutes the number was dialed. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then someone answered. The voice sounded older than Riley expected. Tired. Weathered. Like gravel rolled across concrete. Mercer. Riley introduced herself. The silence afterward lasted nearly 10 seconds. Long enough for everyone to hear breathing. Then Owen Mercer laughed. A short disbelieving laugh. I wondered how long it would take. Riley sat down. You were expecting a call? No. Another laugh. But I was expecting the truth to get tired of hiding eventually. His voice carried age and disappointment. Not defeat. There was a difference. Mr. Mercer. Still Sergeant First Class in my head. Riley nodded. I understand. No, Admiral. His tone softened. You probably do. For the first time all afternoon, Riley almost smiled. Owen Mercer continued. I heard about the river. The room looked at Riley. She sighed. News travels fast. People like stories. What kind of story is this? Owen answered immediately. The kind where somebody finally survives long enough to ask the right questions. The conversation lasted nearly 40 minutes. By the end, Riley understood something important. Owen Mercer wasn't merely another witness. He was the origin. 10 years earlier, Mercer had tried exposing the exact same culture. The same intimidation. The same altered reports. The same command structure. Only the names had changed. Back then it had been different instructors. Different trainees. Different victims. But the methods were identical. Meaning the corruption wasn't temporary. It was inherited. Passed down. Protected. Refined. For a decade. When the call ended, darkness had settled outside. The Columbia River had disappeared into blackness. Fort Raven's lights glowed across the water. Inside Conference Room A, the evidence board now stretched across nearly an entire wall. Names, photos, documents, timelines, connections, victims, witnesses, supervisors, altered reports, deleted complaints, destroyed careers. Riley stood before it. Noah Carter, Mason Reed, Trevor Mills, Ethan Brooks, Owen Mercer, Daniel Cross, each one different, each one isolated. Until now. Until someone finally connected them. Hannah stepped beside her. Ma'am. Riley looked over. What? Hannah studied the board, then quietly said the thing everyone had started realizing. This wasn't built by one commander. No. It survived too long. Yes. Hannah nodded slowly. Then Kane isn't the top. Riley looked at the names, at the signatures, at the edit chains, at the years. Then she looked toward the dark window, toward the invisible river, toward the future. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Raven, she became certain of something. Colonel Victor Kane wasn't protecting the system. He was serving it, which meant somewhere above him sat someone far more dangerous. Someone who had benefited from every altered report, every destroyed whistleblower, every broken trainee, every lie. Riley picked up a marker. At the very top of the board, she wrote 2 words. Unknown superior. Then she capped the marker. And everyone in the room understood the investigation had just become much bigger than Fort Raven. The words unknown superior remained at the top of the evidence board long after everyone had gone home. They seemed to watch the room. Outside the windows, Fort Raven Naval Station had fallen into evening. The Columbia River was invisible now, swallowed by darkness. Floodlights reflected off the water in broken streaks of white and gold. The training fields were quieter than usual. Conversations stopped when certain officers walked by. Doors closed more carefully. Phones were answered with greater caution. The investigation was no longer a rumor. It had become a presence. Riley Hart stood alone in Conference Room A, studying the board. Noah Carter, Mason Reed, Trevor Mills, Ethan Brooks, Owen Mercer, Daniel Cross, Chief Aaron Vale, Commander Blake Sutter, Colonel Victor Kane. Each name represented a thread. The problem was that all threads led upward, and Riley had spent enough years inside military bureaucracy to understand what that meant. When corruption survived for 10 years, it almost never survived alone. At 7:14 p.m., Hannah Vale entered carrying 2 coffee cups and a thick folder. You should sleep eventually, Hannah said. Riley accepted the coffee. I'll schedule that for next week. Hannah smiled faintly. She looked exhausted. The dark circles beneath her eyes had become more visible during the last 12 hours. Her usually perfect bun was beginning to loosen. Yet there was energy behind her fatigue now. Purpose. People could survive remarkable amounts of exhaustion when they finally believed their work mattered. What do you have? Riley asked. Hannah placed the folder on the table. Server audit results. Riley immediately sat down. This was important. Very important. Witnesses could be challenged. Memories could be attacked. Documents could be questioned. Server logs were different. Computers remembered things people forgot. Hannah opened the folder. At first, we only checked Falcon Company records. And we shouldn't have stopped there. Riley's eyes narrowed. Hannah turned several pages. Once we expanded the search, we found similar edit patterns in 3 additional training commands. The room became silent. 3. Not 1. Not 2. 3 additional commands. Riley looked down at the pages. Training Command Sierra. Training Command Blackwater. Training Command Pacific Ridge. Different locations. Different commanders. Different personnel. The same editing pattern. The same timing. The same administrative accounts. The same language changes. Injury reports became equipment failures. Instructor contact disappeared. Protected complaints vanished. Medical notes changed. Witness statements shortened. Every path eventually pointed toward the same regional oversight authority. Colonel Victor Kane's office. Riley slowly closed the folder. What is the date range? 8 years. For a moment, neither woman spoke. 8 years. Not a temporary problem. Not a few bad officers. Not isolated misconduct. A machine. A machine that had been operating long before Logan Pierce ever joined the Navy. Long before Noah Carter enlisted. Long before Mason Reed entered training. A machine that continued regardless of who occupied individual positions. That realization bothered Riley more than anything else. Machines did not care. Machines simply continued. A knock interrupted them. Captain Marcus Ellison entered. He looked older than he had that morning. Much older. A day like this could age a commander, especially when that commander realized problems existed beneath his authority without his knowledge. Marcus carried another folder. "We have a visitor." Riley looked up. "At this hour?" Marcus nodded. She insisted. "Who?" Marcus placed the folder on the table. The name immediately caught Riley's attention. Special Agent Rebecca Morgan. Office of the Inspector General. Federal Oversight Division. Riley leaned back slightly. The investigation had just crossed an invisible line. "What is her arrival time?" 20 minutes ago. Hannah blinked. "She's already here?" Marcus nodded. "Helicopter." Riley almost smiled. Inspector General investigators rarely arrived by helicopter unless someone in Washington had become nervous. And Washington was becoming nervous. "Good. Bring her in." 5 minutes later, Rebecca Morgan entered the conference room. She moved like someone accustomed to walking into uncomfortable situations. Rebecca was 44 years old, medium height, athletic without appearing athletic, with dark brown skin and short black hair cut close around the ears. Her face was angular and intelligent, dominated by sharp hazel eyes that missed very little. A thin white scar crossed her right hand from wrist to thumb. Riley noticed it immediately. People who worked investigations long enough collected scars, physical or otherwise. Rebecca wore a dark gray suit instead of a uniform. No rank, no decorations, no visible status, only confidence. The dangerous kind, the kind built from competence rather than authority. Vice Admiral Hart, Special Agent Morgan. They shook hands. Rebecca's grip was firm, direct. No games. Good. Riley liked her already. Rebecca sat without invitation. Also good. People who waited for permission often waited too long. "I reviewed the preliminary materials during the flight," Rebecca said. "You work quickly." "I work for the Inspector General." A small pause. Then Rebecca added, "We become involved when someone else has worked too slowly." Marcus coughed to hide a laugh. Hannah looked down. Even Riley felt the corner of her mouth move. Rebecca opened her laptop. "I'll skip the formalities." "Please do." Rebecca turned the screen. Rows of data appeared. Thousands of rows. Names, dates, locations, administrative actions, transfer requests, medical separations, protected disclosures. Riley stared. The scale was enormous. "What am I looking at?" Rebecca's expression hardened. "The first layer." Nothing about that answer felt reassuring. Rebecca pointed toward a cluster of highlighted entries. "We matched personnel transfers against protected disclosure activity." Riley immediately understood. People who complained. People who reported concerns. People who became inconvenient. "What did you find?" Rebecca's eyes lifted. An 83% correlation. The room went silent. Even Marcus looked stunned. Rebecca continued. "Individuals who filed protected concerns were dramatically more likely to receive transfers, negative evaluations, medical separation recommendations, or career-ending administrative reviews." Daniel Cross slowly sat down. He had entered moments earlier carrying additional medical files. Now he looked sick. 83%. Rebecca nodded. Across multiple commands. Hannah whispered a curse. Nobody corrected her, because there was no appropriate military language for numbers like that. Rebecca continued. "We also traced approval chains." She clicked another screen. More names appeared. Dozens. Commanders. Administrators. Regional supervisors. Review boards. Legal offices. Medical reviewers. A network. An actual network. Not theoretical. Not suspected. Documented. "What connects them?" Riley asked. Rebecca zoomed in. One name appeared repeatedly. Again, and again, and again. Richard Holloway. The room became completely still. Riley studied the name. Rear Admiral Richard Holloway. 58 years old. Director of Pacific Training Readiness Oversight. One of the most influential officers in the entire regional training structure. The man responsible for evaluating readiness metrics. The man who reviewed injury rates. The man who controlled promotion recommendations for many training commanders. The man sitting above Colonel Victor Kane. "There he is," Rebecca said quietly. Marcus stared at the screen. "My God." Rebecca nodded. "That's what most people say." Riley studied the data. Richard Holloway's name appeared everywhere. Not directly. Never directly. He was too careful for that. Instead, his office appeared. His reviewers appeared. His policy directives appeared. His performance benchmarks appeared. His metrics appeared. Always present. Never visible. Exactly how intelligent corruption survived. What do we know about him? Riley asked. Rebecca opened another file. A photograph appeared. Richard Holloway looked exactly like the sort of man newspapers trusted. Silver hair, strong jaw, blue eyes, perfect posture, a face that communicated authority before he spoke. He looked like a recruiting poster for leadership, which worried Riley immediately. Monsters rarely looked like monsters. West Point graduate, Rebecca said. Decorated combat veteran. Multiple command tours. Congressional advisory positions. 3 decades of exceptional evaluations. Marcus sighed. Impossible. Rebecca looked at him. No. Her voice remained calm. Just experienced. That answer hit harder. Experienced corruption was more dangerous than emotional corruption. Experienced corruption learned patience. Rebecca continued. 6 years ago, Holloway implemented a new readiness evaluation system. She clicked again. Charts appeared. Graphs. Percentages. Performance rankings. Promotion incentives. Funding priorities. Everything centered around one category. Reported injury rates. Riley immediately understood. If injury rates stayed low, commands looked successful. Successful commands received funding. Promotions. Recognition. Career advancement. Everything. The incentive structure itself had become contaminated. You don't have to order people to lie, Riley said quietly. Rebecca nodded. You just make honesty expensive. Nobody spoke, because that was exactly what had happened. Holloway had not needed to tell officers to falsify reports. He only needed to reward outcomes. People found their own shortcuts, then protected those shortcuts, then taught them. Exactly what Riley had concluded earlier. The culture had been taught. Now she knew why. At 8:36 p.m., Hannah received another alert. Unauthorized server activity. The room instantly focused. What happened? Riley asked. Hannah typed rapidly. Someone had attempted access. Multiple files. Personnel records. Medical archives. Protected complaint databases. The requests were denied. But someone had tried. Recently. Very recently. Rebecca stood. Trace it. Hannah worked quickly. The location appeared. Administrative Building C, 3rd floor. Regional Oversight Office. Marcus looked up sharply. That's Kane's temporary workspace. Riley stood immediately. How long ago? 3 minutes. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. Rebecca stopped him. No warnings. Marcus looked confused. Rebecca continued. If someone is destroying evidence, warning them first is considered poor investigative technique. Riley nodded. Agreed. Within moments they were moving. Conference room A emptied. The hallway felt colder. The base seemed quieter. The investigation had entered a new phase. Not interviews. Not witnesses. Active evidence protection. Outside, wind whipped across the pavement. The Columbia River roared somewhere beyond darkness. 3 security officers joined them halfway across the compound. Administrative Building C stood near the northern side of Fort Raven. Old brick. 3 stories. Few windows. Mostly records and oversight personnel. The perfect place for paperwork to hide. They entered through the side door. No alarm. No visible activity. Too quiet. Rebecca led the way. Marcus followed. Riley just behind. 3rd floor. Room 312. Regional Oversight Office. The door stood partially open. Rebecca immediately signaled everyone to stop. Inside, computer monitors glowed. Someone had left quickly. Too quickly. Coffee still steamed from a mug. A desk drawer remained open. A screen displayed deletion software. Rebecca entered first. Her eyes scanned everything. Nobody touched anything. Riley looked around. The office belonged to Colonel Kane's executive staff. But Kane wasn't there. Neither was Lieutenant Grace Holloway. Only abandoned workstations. Abandoned files. Abandoned coffee. And evidence. Lots of evidence. Hannah carefully photographed screens. Rebecca called in Federal Digital Forensics. Marcus secured the hallway. Riley walked slowly around the room. Then she saw it. A printed memorandum. Halfway inside a shredder. Not fully destroyed. Just interrupted. She carefully leaned closer. The heading remained visible. Pacific Readiness Metrics Review. Authorizing Official. Rear Admiral Richard Holloway. Beneath it sat language Riley recognized immediately. Instructions. Performance targets. Injury thresholds. Command evaluation standards. And one sentence highlighted in yellow. Commanders exceeding acceptable injury percentages will be subject to readiness review and leadership assessment. Riley stared at it. There it was. The pressure. The source. Not direct orders to lie. Something smarter. Something safer. Pressure powerful enough to make truth expensive. Exactly as Rebecca had described. Rebecca approached. What did you find? Riley pointed. Rebecca read the page. Then looked up. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. They didn't need to. Both understood. This document connected the culture, connected the incentives, connected the pressure, connected Holloway. Not criminal proof. Not yet. But direction. A map. A beginning. Outside the office, federal digital investigators began arriving. More vehicles entered the base. More personnel. More authority. What had started with a shove into the Columbia River now involved the Inspector General, federal investigators, multiple commands, 8 years of records, dozens of witnesses, and a rear admiral whose fingerprints appeared everywhere. Riley looked through the office window toward the dark base beyond. Fort Raven no longer felt like a single investigation. It felt like the center of something much larger. And somewhere beyond the river, beyond Oregon, beyond this command, someone was realizing the walls were beginning to crack. The office on the 3rd floor of Administrative Building C looked ordinary. That was what made it dangerous. Riley Hart had learned long ago that corruption rarely announced itself with secret tunnels, hidden safes, or dramatic conspiracies. Real corruption preferred fluorescent lighting, filing cabinets, policy memorandums, and people who knew how to smile during inspections. The room smelled faintly of coffee, printer toner, and panic. Someone had been here minutes ago. Someone had tried to reach the files. Someone had left before finishing. Special Agent Rebecca Morgan stood beside the partially shredded memorandum while federal digital forensics personnel began documenting the scene. 3 investigators in dark jackets entered carrying evidence cases and imaging equipment. None of them looked surprised. That was the nature of their work. Surprise disappeared after enough years spent discovering what people did when they thought nobody was watching. The senior forensic examiner introduced himself as Nathan Cole. Nathan was 47 years old, tall and narrow-shouldered, with thinning blonde hair and pale blue eyes hidden behind rectangular glasses. His face seemed almost academic until someone noticed the old burn scar climbing along the left side of his neck. Years earlier, during an evidence recovery operation involving an aircraft fire, Nathan had ignored evacuation orders to save a server rack containing critical data. The burns had nearly killed him. The data had convicted 17 people. Since then, he trusted hard drives more than witnesses. Nobody touches anything, Nathan said calmly. Rebecca nodded. Nathan immediately moved toward the workstation. Within minutes, his team was copying drives and freezing system activity. Hannah watched them work. They moved fast. Nathan overheard her. We move before people remember passwords. For the first time that evening, Hannah smiled. Riley turned her attention back toward the memorandum recovered from the shredder. The highlighted sentence remained visible. Commanders exceeding acceptable injury percentages will be subject to readiness review and leadership assessment. The sentence itself wasn't illegal. That was the problem. Richard Holloway had built protection into the system. Every directive sounded reasonable. Every policy appeared professional. Every memo carried plausible purpose. But when enough reasonable pressures pointed in one direction, people learned what outcomes were expected. And when careers depended upon outcomes, truth became negotiable. Rebecca crossed her arms. Holloway is careful. Very. He never tells anyone to alter reports. No, he doesn't need to. Riley nodded. Exactly. The best architects of corruption rarely touch the crime directly. They built environments where others committed it for them. At 9:27 p.m., Nathan Cole called everyone over. I found something. The room immediately focused. Nathan enlarged a deleted email thread recovered from temporary storage. Most people assumed deleting an email removed it. Nathan knew better. Computers remembered. The email chain involved Colonel Victor Kane, Commander Blake Sutter, 3 regional administrators, and an address belonging to Rear Admiral Richard Holloway's executive office. The subject line read, Readiness Metric Exception Request. Nathan opened the messages. The earliest email came from Kane. Recent injury numbers may affect quarterly readiness evaluation. Request guidance regarding reporting standards. Riley's eyes narrowed. Guidance, not permission. Guidance. Careful language. The reply arrived 2 hours later. Not from Holloway directly. From his executive administrator. A woman named Sandra Whitaker. The name meant nothing initially. Then Rebecca suddenly leaned forward. I know that name. Everyone looked at her. Rebecca pointed. Sandra Whitaker. You've seen it before? Riley asked. Rebecca nodded slowly. 3 separate investigations. The room became silent. Rebecca continued. Not criminal investigations. Administrative reviews. Meaning, every time someone filed a protected disclosure against a regional training command, Sandra Whitaker's office became involved. Nathan turned toward her. Coincidence? Rebecca laughed softly. No. Nathan nodded. Good answer. Riley studied the email. Sandra Whitaker's response was brief. Regional readiness expectations remain unchanged. Commands should ensure reporting accuracy reflects complete operational context. Nothing illegal. Nothing direct. Nothing obvious. Yet Riley immediately understood why it mattered. The phrase complete operational context appeared repeatedly throughout the altered reports. The exact phrase. The same language. The same justification. The same shield. Rebecca saw it too. That's not an instruction. No. It's a signal. Yes. Signals were safer than orders. Signals created deniability. Signals allowed corruption to travel without fingerprints. At 10:03 p.m., another breakthrough arrived. This one came from Ethan Brooks. The secure upload channel received a new package. Labeled Holloway material. The room instantly focused. Ethan had already provided enough evidence to trigger a federal investigation. If he was sending more, it mattered. Hannah opened the files. Inside were photographs. Old photographs. Years old. The first image showed Colonel Victor Kane standing beside Rear Admiral Richard Holloway during a command ceremony. Normal. Expected. The second image showed Holloway speaking privately with Commander Blake Sutter during a training conference. Still normal. Then came the third photograph. Nobody spoke. The image showed Holloway, Kane, and Owen Mercer. Together. 10 years earlier. Before Mercer lost his career. Before Ethan Brooks. Before Noah Carter. Before Mason Reed. Before everything. Riley slowly sat down. The timeline changed instantly. This goes back farther than we thought. Rebecca nodded. Much farther. Hannah opened the final attachment. A scanned notebook page. Handwritten. Dated 10 years earlier. The author was Owen Mercer. The note contained only one paragraph. Met with Holloway today. He says injury numbers are threatening congressional support. Says leaders must learn to think bigger than individual incidents. Kane agreed with him immediately. Something feels wrong. Silence filled the office. Riley read the paragraph twice. Then 3 times. The note wasn't proof. But it was history. History mattered. It showed origin, direction, intent. Rebecca folded her arms. Owen saw the beginning. Looks like it. And Kane learned directly from Holloway. Riley nodded. Exactly. The culture had not emerged naturally. It had been taught. Just as she suspected. Taught. Rewarded. Protected. Passed down. At 10:41 p.m., Captain Marcus Ellison received a call. He stepped aside to answer. When he returned, his face had changed. What happened? Riley asked. Marcus hesitated. Not a good sign. Another base. Rebecca immediately straightened. Which one? Pacific Ridge. The room went silent. Pacific Ridge was one of the 3 commands Hannah identified earlier. Marcus continued. Their commanding officer just requested legal counsel. Nathan looked up. Why? Marcus exhaled. They discovered altered injury files. Nobody spoke. Marcus continued. And 2 officers are already claiming they were pressured to change reports. The room seemed to shift. The investigation was spreading faster than anyone expected. Fort Raven was no longer the center. It was only the beginning. Rebecca slowly nodded. There it is. What? Hannah asked. The pattern breaking. Everyone looked at her. Rebecca explained. Most corruption survives because people believe they're alone. Nobody interrupted. Once they realize they're not alone, everything changes. Riley understood exactly what she meant. Noah Carter thought he was alone. Mason Reed thought he was alone. Trevor Mills thought he was alone. Ethan Brooks thought he was alone. Now they knew otherwise. And apparently officers at Pacific Ridge were beginning to realize it too. At 11:15 p.m., federal authorization finally arrived from Washington. The message appeared on Rebecca's secure phone. She read it once, then handed it to Riley. Official expansion authorization. Multi-installation investigation. Inspector General lead authority. Federal evidence preservation orders. The biggest step yet. Marcus stared at the document. My God. Rebecca smiled faintly. Washington finally woke up. Riley handed the phone back. The authorization changed everything. No more local review. No more internal containment. No more quiet fixes. The system had become a federal case. Outside, rain began falling over Fort Raven. Soft at first, then heavier. Water streaked across the windows. The Columbia River disappeared entirely behind darkness and weather. Riley watched the rain for a moment. It reminded her of another night many years ago, a deployment briefing in the North Atlantic. A commander she respected once told her something important. If a problem survives multiple leaders, stop looking at people and start looking at incentives. At the time, she had been 30 years old. Now she finally understood how completely that advice applied here. This was never about one instructor, or one commander, or one report. The system rewarded concealment. The system punished honesty. The system promoted compliance. And Richard Holloway had helped build it. A knock interrupted her thoughts. One of Nathan's technicians entered. Young, nervous, excited. Sir. Nathan looked up. What? The technician held up a portable drive. We recovered deleted communications. Nathan immediately stood. From where? The executive office archive. Rebecca exchanged a look with Riley. Another piece. Another layer. Nathan connected the drive. Dozens of recovered messages appeared. Most were routine. Scheduling. Travel. Budgets. Then one file caught his attention. Not because of its contents. Because of its title. Readiness Management Strategy. The file opened. A presentation. 27 slides. Prepared years earlier. The authors were listed. Rear Admiral Richard Holloway. Colonel Victor Kane. Several others. The presentation discussed readiness metrics. Public perception. Congressional oversight. Funding priorities. Nothing illegal. Until slide 17. Everyone stared. The slide contained a chart comparing injury reporting rates. Commands with low injury numbers consistently received greater funding, better evaluations, and higher promotion rates. Commands with high injury numbers suffered. The final note at the bottom read, leadership narratives must remain aligned with readiness objectives. Nobody spoke. Rebecca finally broke the silence. Leadership narratives. Nathan laughed once. Not happily. They even gave it a name. Riley stared at the screen. Leadership narratives. A professional phrase. A clean phrase. A harmless phrase. And beneath it sat years of altered reports, broken trainees, destroyed careers, and silenced whistleblowers. Language could be terrifying when used correctly. At midnight, the office finally began emptying. Federal teams remained. Forensic copies continued. Evidence collection continued. But the first phase of the investigation was ending. Rebecca gathered her files. Nathan prepared transfer drives. Marcus looked exhausted. Henna looked ready to continue for another 12 hours. Riley stepped toward the window. Rain covered the glass. Fort Raven shimmered beyond it. Different now. Smaller somehow. The investigation had grown beyond the base. Beyond Kane. Beyond Sutter. Even beyond Holloway. Because systems that survived this long rarely ended with one senior officer. Rebecca approached quietly. You think there's more? It wasn't a question. Riley nodded. Yes. Rebecca looked out toward the darkness. So do I. Neither woman spoke for several moments. Finally, Rebecca asked, do you regret coming here? Riley thought about the river. About Logan Pierce. About Ethan Brooks sitting alone in Idaho. About Noah Carter finally speaking. About Mason Reed learning he wasn't crazy. About Trevor's notebook. About Owen Mercer waiting 10 years. Then she shook her head. No. Rebecca smiled slightly. Good. Why? Rebecca looked toward the evidence room. Because this investigation is about to become the biggest thing the Navy has faced in years. The rain continued falling. The Columbia River continued moving. Federal investigators continued working. And somewhere far above Fort Raven, people who had spent years protecting a carefully constructed system were beginning to realize that the system had finally attracted the wrong adversary. Vice Admiral Riley Hart. The woman they thought would disappear into a river. The woman who climbed back out. And now carried the entire truth with her. 3 months after Vice Admiral Riley Hart climbed out of the Columbia River, Fort Raven Naval Station no longer resembled the place she had first encountered. The transformation had not happened quickly. Real change never did. Buildings remained where they had always stood. Training fields still stretched toward the water. The same wind moved across the Columbia. The same rain fell from Oregon skies. The same recruits arrived carrying ambition, fear, and dreams larger than themselves. But something invisible had changed. Fear had changed sides. For years, young trainees feared speaking. Now commanders feared being recorded. For years, whistleblowers feared retaliation. Now administrators feared audits. For years, truth had walked through Fort Raven like an unwanted visitor. Now truth carried credentials. At 7:15 on a gray autumn morning, Riley stood inside a temporary federal operations center established in one of the administrative buildings. The room had once belonged to regional oversight staff. Now it belonged to investigators. Rows of workstations filled the space. Evidence boards covered the walls. Secure servers hummed continuously. Federal agents moved between desks carrying files, hard drives, and interview summaries. The atmosphere reminded Riley of a military command center during active operations. In many ways, that was exactly what it had become. The battle was simply different. No enemy uniforms. No weapons. No battlefield. Only facts. And facts, Riley had learned, could destroy careers more effectively than artillery. Special Agent Rebecca Morgan stood at the center table reviewing overnight reports. She looked even sharper than she had during the first days of the investigation. Months of work had not exhausted her. They had energized her. Some people came alive when they finally found the thing they were meant to fight. Rebecca was one of them. Her short black hair remained perfectly maintained despite endless hours. Her dark eyes moved rapidly across documents, connecting details faster than most people could read them. "Morning," Riley said. Rebecca looked up. "Morning, Admiral. You slept? 4 hours. That's not sleep. It's enough." Riley smiled faintly. Rebecca handed her a folder. "Latest status update." Riley opened it. The first page contained a photograph. Colonel Victor Kane. The image had been taken 2 days earlier. Gone was the polished confidence Riley remembered from their first meeting. Gone was the controlled smile. Gone was the calm certainty. Kane sat entering a federal facility wearing civilian clothing instead of a uniform. His shoulders looked smaller. His face looked older. His eyes looked tired. Very tired. Below the photograph sat a single line. "Federal detention order approved." Riley stared at it quietly. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Simply recognition. Consequences had finally arrived. "What happened yesterday?" Riley asked. Rebecca sat down. Kane agreed to partial cooperation. That surprised Riley. Only slightly. People often discovered honesty after evidence became overwhelming. How partial? Rebecca opened another file. Enough. Inside sat summaries from Kane's interviews. Names. Dates. Communications. Approval chains. Budget discussions. Performance reviews. Most importantly, Kane had confirmed something investigators suspected for weeks. Richard Holloway knew. Not everything, but enough. Far more than enough. He finally admitted it? Riley asked. Rebecca nodded. He claims he never considered himself part of a criminal conspiracy. Riley almost laughed. What did he consider himself? Rebecca read directly from the transcript. A leader balancing organizational realities. The room became silent. Then Rebecca rolled her eyes. That's a direct quote. Riley closed the folder. Organizational realities. There it was. The language again. The language that transformed suffering into metrics, broken bodies into statistics, destroyed careers into administrative outcomes. Kane had spent years hiding behind vocabulary. Now vocabulary was all he had left. What happens next? Riley asked. Rebecca's answer came immediately. Richard Holloway. At another workstation, Nathan Cole looked up from his computer. Speaking of Holloway, everyone turned toward him. Nathan stood. Months of investigation had affected him as well. The quiet forensic expert seemed leaner than before, almost worn down by the volume of evidence. Yet his eyes remained sharp. Data still energized him. He held up a printed document. We finished reconstructing the deleted archive. Rebecca immediately approached. So, Nathan handed her the pages. We found the communications. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Rebecca looked down and smiled. Not a pleasant smile. Not a happy smile. A prosecutor's smile. A dangerous smile. Well, she said quietly. What? Riley asked. Rebecca looked up. We finally found Holloway's fingerprints. The room seemed to pause. Nathan explained. Months earlier, investigators had discovered the policy structure, the incentives, the pressure, the expectations. But direct evidence linking Holloway to specific decisions remained limited. Until now, the recovered communications contained several exchanges between Holloway and senior command staff. Most remained carefully written, professional, sanitized. Then came one message, one mistake, one sentence. The kind of sentence powerful people believed nobody would ever see. Nathan pointed to the highlighted line. Command visibility is more important than individual injury narratives. Handle accordingly. Richard Holloway. Directly. In writing. Riley stared at the sentence. Years. Years of damage. Years of altered reports. Years of intimidation. And eventually the entire structure cracked because one man sent one message. Human arrogance remained remarkably predictable. Rebecca closed the folder. We're moving. When? Today. At 10:42 a.m., federal authorities formally suspended Rear Admiral Richard Holloway from duty. The news traveled through military channels with astonishing speed. By noon, nearly every command along the West Coast had heard. By evening, defense reporters were calling Washington. By the following morning, national media had begun asking questions. The system that once operated quietly now sat beneath spotlights. And spotlights frightened people, especially people with secrets. At Fort Raven, reactions varied. Some celebrated privately. Some worried publicly. Some denied everything. Others finally started talking. One of those people was Lieutenant Grace Holloway, the same young aide who had once followed Colonel Kane through the administrative building carrying a tablet and carefully avoiding eye contact. Now she sat across from Riley in a protected interview room. She looked exhausted. Weeks earlier she had seemed ambitious. Now she simply seemed disappointed. Sometimes disappointment hurt more than fear. Grace was 27 years old, intelligent, organized, and loyal by nature. That loyalty had once been her greatest strength. It had also become her greatest vulnerability. Because loyal people often remained beside bad leaders longer than they should. Not from agreement. From hope. Hope that things would improve. Hope that explanations existed. Hope that the people they admired were better than appearances suggested. Hope eventually ran out. Grace sat quietly for several seconds before speaking. I thought he was a good officer. Riley knew immediately who she meant. Richard Holloway. Grace stared at her hands. I really believed it. Nobody interrupted. Grace continued. He remembered birthdays. The statement surprised Riley. He visited injured sailors. Another surprise. He helped families during deployments. Grace looked up. Her eyes were red. Not from crying. From months of sleeping badly. How can somebody do all that and still allow this? The question hung in the room. Riley had spent decades answering versions of it. The answer never became easier. Because people are rarely one thing, Riley said. Grace looked away. He wasn't cruel. No. He wasn't stupid. No. He wasn't incompetent. No. Grace nodded slowly. That seemed to hurt most. If Holloway had been a monster, understanding would be easier. Monsters simplified choices. Human beings complicated them, especially powerful ones. Grace reached into her bag, then removed a notebook. Riley immediately recognized the pattern. Notebooks. Records. Copies. The investigation had become possible because ordinary people refused to forget. Grace placed it on the table. I started writing things down 6 months ago. Riley remained silent. Grace continued. At first I thought I was protecting myself. She smiled sadly. Maybe I was protecting everyone else. Inside the notebook sat meeting notes. Private conversations. Scheduling details. Observations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. Something far more valuable. Context. The human behavior surrounding the decisions. The notebook showed increasing concern inside Holloway's office. Growing pressure. More discussions about injury metrics. More concern about congressional reviews. More fear regarding funding. Most importantly, Grace documented moments when staff expressed concerns. And how those concerns were dismissed. Not with threats. Not with shouting. With bureaucracy. The most efficient weapon in the world. By the time the interview ended, investigators possessed another layer of truth. Not criminal truth. Cultural truth. Sometimes that mattered just as much. Later that afternoon, Riley visited the rehabilitation center where Mason Reed continued recovery. The young man looked healthier than during their first conversation. Still injured. Still walking carefully. Still carrying pain. But healthier. Hope had returned. Hope changed posture. Changed expression. Changed people. Mason smiled when Riley entered. A real smile. Not the strained version she remembered from earlier interviews. "Admiral, how are you feeling?" "Better." He hesitated. "Actually better." Riley sat beside the bed. Dr. Lillian Shaw joined them shortly afterward. The physician looked pleased. Professionally pleased. The kind doctors reserved for patients finally moving forward. "Mason's benefits have been restored," Lillian said. Mason laughed softly, still disbelieving. "All of them." Riley nodded. The corrected records had already begun changing lives. Medical coverage, rehabilitation support, career evaluations, disability benefits, the practical consequences of truth. Sometimes justice looked less like punishment and more like paperwork finally telling the truth. Mason looked toward the window. "I thought my life was over." Riley said nothing, because she knew exactly how many people had felt that way. Mason continued. "I kept thinking maybe I deserved it." The sentence broke something inside the room. Lillian looked away. Riley stared at him quietly. There it was. The real damage. Not the injury. The belief. The belief that suffering was deserved. The belief that authority must be correct. The belief that speaking up was weakness. Those beliefs took longer to heal than bones. "You didn't deserve it," Riley said. Mason nodded. Slowly, like a man learning a new language. And for the first time since the investigation began, Riley allowed herself to believe they were finally winning. Not because people were being punished. Because people were beginning to recover. The difference mattered. Very much. Across the country, dozens of similar reviews continued. Hundreds of altered records were being restored. Hundreds. The number still shocked Riley. Each file represented a human life. A human story. A person who trusted the system. And sometimes lost because of that trust. Now those stories were finally being heard. And the work was only beginning. 6 months after the investigation became public, the first convictions began arriving. Not all at once. Justice rarely moved that way. Real justice resembled a tide. Slow. Persistent. Unstoppable. Each week brought another announcement. Another ruling. Another restoration. Another name. Colonel Victor Kane became one of the first senior officers formally charged. The federal courtroom in Seattle was crowded the day proceedings began. Reporters filled the rear rows. Military observers occupied entire sections. Former trainees sat quietly along the side walls. Some had traveled hundreds of miles simply to watch. Not because they wanted revenge. Because they wanted confirmation. Confirmation that the years had happened. Confirmation that the pain had been real. Confirmation that they had not imagined everything. Riley attended only one day. That was enough. Victor Kane looked dramatically different from the man she had first met at Fort Raven. Power had left him. People often underestimated how visible power could be. When authority disappeared, posture changed. Expressions changed. Voices changed. Victor Kane sat at the defense table wearing a dark suit instead of a uniform. No decorations. No insignia. No symbols. Only a man. For the first time in many years. Just a man. Riley watched him quietly. At one point Kane noticed her. Their eyes met briefly. Neither looked away. Neither smiled. Neither nodded. Nothing remained to say. Months earlier Kane had defended the system. Later he had cooperated with investigators. Now he sat waiting for consequences. The process belonged to the courts. Not Riley. That distinction mattered. Afterward, she left without speaking to reporters. Outside, rain fell across Seattle. The weather reminded her of Oregon. It reminded her of the river. Everything still seemed connected to the river. 3 weeks later came the announcement everyone expected. Rear Admiral Richard Holloway was formally suspended pending federal prosecution. The news reached every major naval installation in the country within hours. Some officers expressed shock. Others expressed disappointment. Many expressed neither. They simply nodded. Because deep down they had known. Perhaps not the details. But something. People often sense corruption long before they could prove it. What they lacked was evidence. Now evidence existed. Richard Holloway resigned before trial. His resignation statement was carefully written. Professional. Measured. Regretful. It mentioned service. Sacrifice. Commitment. Leadership. It never mentioned victims. Riley noticed that immediately. So did Rebecca Morgan. The two women sat together reviewing the statement inside the Federal Operations Center. Rebecca placed the paper down. He still doesn't understand. Riley looked up. What? Rebecca pointed. Everything. The statement described damage to institutions, damage to confidence, damage to public trust, never damage to people. Not once. Rebecca leaned back. That's how these things happen. Riley knew she was right. The moment systems became more important than people, corruption found room to grow. Months passed. The investigation expanded further. Additional commands were reviewed. Additional records were recovered. Additional whistleblowers came forward. By the end, more than 400 altered injury reports had been restored. 400. The number stunned everyone. Each file required review, verification, correction, legal processing, benefit restoration, medical evaluation. An army of administrators worked for months repairing damage. But they did it. Slowly, patiently, one file at a time, one life at a time, one truth at a time. Among those files sat Mason Reed's. Riley received the update on a bright winter morning. The message came from Dr. Lillian Shaw. Mason's discharge classification corrected. Full medical benefits restored. Long-term rehabilitation approved. Educational assistance reinstated. Career record amended. Attached was a photograph. Mason stood outside the rehabilitation center. Still using a cane. Still recovering. But smiling. Really smiling. Beside him stood Dr. Shaw. Behind them sat fresh snow on distant hills. The photograph captured something paperwork never could. Relief. Riley stared at it longer than she expected. Then she saved the picture. Months later, she would still occasionally look at it. Not because Mason's case was unique. Because it wasn't. That was the point. There were hundreds of Masons. Hundreds of people who simply needed the truth restored. Ethan Brooks received his own restoration. The ceremony took place at a modest auditorium in Washington. Nothing grand. Nothing theatrical. Exactly how Ethan preferred it. Riley attended. So did Rebecca. So did several former trainees. Ethan looked uncomfortable from the moment he arrived. Recognition embarrassed him. Always had. He was 33 now. Still lean. Still thoughtful. Still carrying himself like a man more comfortable listening than speaking. The official citation described his courage. His persistence. His preservation of evidence. His refusal to destroy records despite pressure. When his name was called, the audience stood. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. Ethan looked overwhelmed, almost distressed. When it finally ended, he approached the podium. Everyone expected a speech. Ethan hated speeches. That made what happened next even more meaningful. He looked around the room, then quietly said, "I kept copies because I thought someone else would eventually be brave enough to use them." Silence. Absolute silence. Then he looked toward Riley. Not dramatically. Not publicly. Just briefly. The way one professional acknowledged another. And he continued. "Turns out I was right." That was all. The audience stood again. Later, Rebecca laughed. "Shortest acceptance speech I've ever seen." Riley smiled. It was also one of the best. Not everyone received awards. Not everyone wanted them. Trevor Mills declined public recognition entirely. Noah Carter returned to active service after receiving protections. Daniel Cross accepted a leadership position overseeing medical integrity reviews. Owen Mercer received something more important than a medal. An apology. Official. Written. Permanent. The Navy restored portions of his record and acknowledged retaliation had occurred. When Riley called to tell him, he remained silent for several seconds. Then he said something she never forgot. "I don't need them to make me a hero." His voice sounded older. Softer. Lighter. "I just needed them to stop calling me a liar." Sometimes justice was surprisingly simple. One afternoon in early spring, Riley returned to Fort Raven. The investigation headquarters had closed. Federal teams had departed. Temporary offices had disappeared. Most evidence had moved elsewhere. The base looked ordinary again. Almost. Several things had changed. New reporting systems existed. Independent review procedures existed. Training oversight had been restructured. Most importantly, people talked differently. Fear no longer dominated conversations. Truth no longer felt forbidden. Progress. Not perfection. Progress. Riley walked alone toward the training docks. The same docks. The same river. The same water. The Columbia moved beneath gray skies exactly as it had 6 months earlier. Time changed people faster than it changed rivers. Footsteps approached behind her. Riley turned. Logan Pierce. He stopped several feet away. For a moment, neither spoke. Logan looked different. Not physically. Emotionally. The arrogance had vanished. The certainty had vanished. Life had clearly educated him. Sometimes painfully. He was still young, still strong, still carrying consequences. Following the investigation, Logan received disciplinary action. His career had nearly ended. Almost. But investigators eventually concluded something Riley suspected months earlier. Logan had committed misconduct, but he had also been shaped by the culture under investigation. He had enforced lessons taught by people above him. That explanation did not excuse him. It contextualized him. Now he stood before Riley wearing a different expression than the one he carried on the dock. Humility. Real humility. Hard-earned humility. Admiral. Pierce. Logan looked toward the river. I wanted to thank you. Riley raised an eyebrow. That's unusual. A small smile appeared. Briefly. Yeah. He nodded. It is. The wind moved across the water. Logan continued. They put me through the new leadership program. Riley knew. She had approved it personally. The program focused on ethical command responsibility, critical thinking, accountability, the exact things missing from Falcon Company's culture. It helped. Logan laughed softly. Hurt first. That answer sounded honest. Then he looked directly at her. I thought authority meant obedience. Riley remained silent. I thought strength meant certainty. He shook his head. I thought people beneath me existed to follow instructions. The river moved quietly below. What do you think now? Riley asked. Logan took his time answering. Finally, he said, I think leadership starts when you question the easy answer. Riley studied him. The statement wasn't perfect. Neither was he. Neither was anyone. But it was growth. Real growth. The kind that mattered. Logan looked embarrassed. Still working on it. We all are. For several seconds, they simply stood there. Then Logan glanced toward the water. The same water. The same place. The beginning. I've always wanted to ask something. Riley smiled slightly. I know. Logan looked surprised. You do? Everyone asks eventually. Logan laughed. The question was obvious. The question reporters asked. The question investigators asked. The question trainees asked. The question Rebecca asked. The question Hannah asked. The question everyone asked. Why weren't you angry? Logan looked at her. You should have hated me. Riley turned toward the river. The Columbia reflected the afternoon light in broken silver patterns. For a moment, she remembered everything. The shove, the impact, the cold, the shock, the climb, the evidence, the names, the witnesses, the truth. Then she smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was complicated. If you hadn't pushed me into the river, she said quietly, I might have spent the day reviewing paperwork. Logan stared. Riley continued. I might have accepted briefings. The wind lifted her hair slightly. I might have missed the urgency. The river moved below. I might have overlooked things. Logan said nothing. Neither did the river. Neither did the sky. Finally, Riley looked at him. You made a terrible decision. Logan nodded immediately. Yes, ma'am. But terrible decisions sometimes expose deeper truths. For the first time since arriving, Logan seemed to understand. Not forgiveness. Understanding. Different things. Riley looked back toward the water. The river wasn't the story. Logan followed her gaze. No, it wasn't. The story had always been beneath the surface. The hidden reports. The missing complaints. The altered records. The silenced people. The culture. The system. The truth. All waiting below. Just like the river. After a while, Logan left. Riley remained alone. The afternoon slowly faded. The Columbia continued its journey toward the Pacific. Unconcerned with investigations. Unconcerned with promotions. Unconcerned with scandals. Water simply moved forward. Eventually Hannah called. Then Rebecca. Then work resumed. Because work always resumed. Before leaving the dock, Riley looked once more toward the river where everything had started. Then she smiled. Very slightly. Sometimes history began with heroic acts. Sometimes it began with grand decisions. Sometimes it began with extraordinary courage. And sometimes the truth entered the world through something much smaller. A mistake. A shove. A moment. A ripple spreading across dark water. And if Logan Pierce had not pushed her into the Columbia River that morning, Riley Hart might never have seen the secrets hidden beneath the surface. The investigation would still have happened eventually. Maybe. The victims might still have been heard. Perhaps. The truth might still have emerged. One day. But not then. Not there. Not in the way it did. And sometimes the difference between justice delayed and justice restored was nothing more than a single moment that forced someone to look deeper. The river had given Riley that moment. The rest had been truth. Sometimes God's greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder from heaven or signs written across the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, hidden inside moments that seem painful, unfair, or even meaningless when they first happen. Riley Hart never planned to uncover a corruption network. Ethan Brooks never planned to become a whistleblower. Mason Reed never imagined that the truth would one day restore his future. And even Logan Pierce never understood that one terrible mistake would eventually expose years of hidden wrongdoing. Yet that is often how God works. He sees what we cannot see. While we see a setback, He may see a beginning. While we see a closed door, He may be opening another one beyond our sight. While we ask why something difficult happened, God may already be using that moment to reveal a greater purpose. The morning Riley was pushed into the Columbia River looked like a disaster. It looked like humiliation. It looked like a mistake. But beneath the surface, God was already bringing hidden truths into the light. What seemed like one careless act became the first step toward restoring justice for hundreds of people who had been forgotten, ignored, or silenced. Most of us will never uncover a military scandal or become part of a federal investigation. But every day we face smaller choices that matter just as much. We choose whether to speak the truth when it would be easier to stay silent. We choose whether to help someone who is struggling. We choose whether to stand up for what is right when nobody else does. And sometimes those small choices become the very tools God uses to change lives. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who may need a reminder that truth still matters, courage still matters, and doing the right thing is never wasted. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to see how far this story has traveled and hear what lessons stood out most to you. And if you enjoy stories of faith, hope, courage, justice, and the extraordinary ways God works through ordinary people, please subscribe to the channel and join our community. May God bless you and your family with peace in difficult times, strength when life feels heavy, wisdom when important choices must be made, and hope for every tomorrow. May He guide your steps, protect those you love, and remind you that even in moments that seem confusing or painful, He is still at work behind the scenes. Thank you for watching, and until next time, may God's grace go with you wherever you are.